to see my files there. I forgot to close the folder. Hi. Welcome to Crime in Court. My name is Heather, and this, I'm going to go back to the thumbnail real quick. This is episode 13, the trial, titled Not Guilty. And you will find out, if you don't already know what that means, you'll find out later in this episode. So to your left, you have Zachariah, who unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. I think he kind of looks good with long hair. But what do you guys think? They did not cut his hair in the prison or jail, wherever he was. I think it's Kenosha County Jail that he's at. And so they wouldn't cut his hair. They refused haircuts for him. And for this particular day, his sentencing day, they did not give him a hair tie. So all of trial, they gave him a hair tie or something to put his hair up. And then the day of sentencing, after he's found guilty, big surprise there, you guys should, that shouldn't be a big spoiler, hopefully, to any of you. Sorry, moving my cords here. So he was found to be guilty by the court, or by the jury, but we will get into that in this episode. I'm going to come back on the screen here. So we'll get into this. We're going to watch the closings. So closing arguments from prosecution, defense, and then prosecution again, and then we're going to watch the verdict being read and then the sentencing. So it's all in one here for you. And I've got it ready, so let's get started. Before I do, please hit that like button. I always forget to say that. Please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not a subscriber, because then you'll get notifications when these videos premiere. So thank you very much. I appreciate you if you already are subscribed. Appreciate you if you just hit the like button. So thank you very much for watching as well. Let's get started.
We're going to hear the closing arguments of the attorneys, and because this is not evidence, no note-taking will be permitted for the duration of the trial. We follow the classical format, debate format in the courts. The district attorney bears the burden of proof.
Jeez.
And because of the allocation of the burden, will be entitled to give the first argument, and then he will be given a second rebuttal argument, which will be confined to answering the defense in its presentation. So it'll be the state defense and then the state again. And then I'll give you those couple of instructions, and the case will be turned over to you. Anybody have a problem having some food brought in? Okay, I'm going to do that then. Surprise. So take care of that, please. And with that, Mr. Gravely, you have the floor.
Thank you. Your Honor, counsels, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I just want to please start by expressing, without really having words for it, the gratitude that I think we all feel for your service on this case. I mean, so many weeks, way beyond what you were expected to do. So just as simply as I can, please let me just be part of expressing my just profound gratitude for your time and your service and your consideration in this case. I want to start with just a couple of housekeeping things about the charges, and then I'm going to get into the crux of the argument. A couple of the charges are stalking offenses, probably not something you think about all the time. Stalking involves two or more things happening, so a course of conduct where two or more things are done by the defendant. We're talking in our stalking allegations today about the April 24th peek-in, using his daughter as one of the peek-ins over at Sadie's place, the planting of a phone to track her on May 8th, again, peeking in or listening in on May 13th at Rosalio Gutierrez's place, and then, of course, the homicide committed on May 17th. So we're asking the court, you guys, to consider all of those things as acts of stalking, as well as the emails sent and the texts sent, the communications, the recordings of Sadie Beecham as well. So what needs to happen for a stalking is you need to have an impact that a reasonable person would have, and it's called, the part that we care about is suffering serious emotional distress, which means that you have to feel harassed or tormented. The reasonable person has to feel that. The stalking statute also requires that the individual involved, the person who is suffering at the other end of that, also has to suffer serious emotional distress. In other words, personally feel that they have been harassed or tormented. And you heard in the texts and some of the discussions, both Rosalio and Sadie wrestle with the consequences of this, right? Talking about it. Sadie has a text where she says, I hope this, doesn't mean that you will, want to end this relationship because of this harassment. At points, Rosalio is trying to be comforting to her. At points, he is feeling aggressive, right? I'd like to go break this guy's legs. What's his address? The kind of human emotions that people have in response to feeling like their personal liberty, their space, everything that they sort of care about in their privacy is being compromised by this other person. And so those are the emotions that both you heard expressed in the text messages from both Rosalio and Sadie, and the question of what a reasonable person would think about that. Another just small housekeeping along those lines is hiding a corpse. We're suggesting to you that when Rosalio Gutierrez is murdered on the 17th at around 10 p.m., the placement of his body in the defendant's minivan is the beginning of a long stage of hiding a corpse. And so that is where that hiding a corpse begins in terms of our allegations to present to you today. So I want to first cover this idea that there are two separate but combined sets of facts that allow you to know that there is proof beyond reasonable doubt that Rosalio Gutierrez was murdered on May 17th, 2020 at around 10 p.m., just around 10 p.m. at his own apartment. And I say that because there are two things that happen. One, there is a bloody, bloody scene. A scene that has pools of blood that I'm going to talk about a little more in a second. But also, there are the circumstances of Rosalio Gutierrez's absence from the life of everyone he cared about and who cares about him. Rosalio's phone shows he gets home at about 9:08 p.m. He's just dropped his kids off back at their mom's. He's expecting Naridia Macias. Her last text to him is at 9:37 p.m., and that text is never answered. She stays at the apartment building. Remember, she's at the wrong building. She doesn't see what is happening. But she stays for about a little more than a half hour, and she's texting and calling, essentially expressing to him, I'm here, what's going on? And none of those are answered. None of those are viewed. So at this point, from 9:37 on, Rosalio Gutierrez is no longer answering anyone who is concerned about him or interested in him or who care about him and his life. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are 1,039 days later. And what I just described to you is still the circumstance today. Rosalio loved his kids. He loved his mom, who he was in communication with as a guy almost 40 or around 40 every day. Every day he was in communication with his mom. And that suddenly ended. Suddenly ended at just around 10 p.m. on May 17th.
I don't remember her testimony being that she talked to him every day. I remember it being like she talked to him every few days or a couple days a week. That's what I remember her testimony, but I don't know. Am I wrong?
He planned and proudly was ready to coach his promising son in baseball, and he never got a chance to do that. He had a summer camp scheduled for him and his children called, and it's a summer camp that's common for folks in Kenosha, and that summer camp was already planned. It's in his calendar, and that never occurred on the 19th of May. He no longer attended any of the holidays or events or visits. He no longer had any experiences with his children. He was a father whose daughter had a little love note to Dad on the pillow when she left. He was a father whose son shared his love of baseball and emulated him in every way he could in that love. And all of that has been gone for every day since May 17th, 2020. So combined with that bloody scene, you as a jury know he was murdered. You know that because those two things together show you that he is gone. So you know that there is a quantity of blood and a magnitude of blood in this case.
We don't know for a fact that that is what happened, and we can infer that that's what happened, but I don't think, we can definitively say that. I don't know. I'm kind of the mindset that if you can't find the body, like, you don't have enough evidence to convict somebody. I'm sorry, you just don't, unless you can tie them to that person directly. And this case is all circumstantial. All circumstantial.
Which certainly tells that story. There is blood pooled on the floor by the couch. There's blood pooled on the couch itself. There's blood sprayed on wall after wall and on the ceiling in multiple areas and on almost every surface of his main room and the hallway by his door. There is a quantity and magnitude of blood which is absolutely consistent with Rosalio Gutierrez being murdered there at his own apartment. And every bit of that blood that's been tested in those different areas all come back to the DNA of Mr. Gutierrez himself. So that quantity of blood and his absence from any contact, any social media, any financial records, any of the people who care about him, any phones, any in-person contact, all of that is gone over those 1,039 days. And so we know and can say as a legal conclusion that a reasonable jury will find that he is murdered. The blood and his absence both tell us that story. So what else do we know about this crime based on the evidence that's been presented in this case? And I want to suggest to you first that the next obvious and real conclusion is that this is a highly planned, thought out, and executed crime of murder. And so I want you to think about who there is in this case who has shown a propensity, right? Who has shown day after day in the conduct that we have outlined patterns of that sort of planning, that sort of obsessive conduct, that sort of refusal to follow any of the limits and rules that most of us would govern ourselves, and who we are willing to use to accomplish our goals in our lives. So when I say who, I mean, of course, the defendant, right? Because here's what we know about him in terms of other things happening in the very few weeks that we have a glimpse of his overwhelming, out of control, no limits jealousy towards any new love life for his ex, Sadie Beecham. What are those pieces of evidence I'm suggesting are signs of an obsessed planner that are the signature of this crime of murder? Well, one is Olivia, and this is uncontroverted evidence, right? This is unchallenged evidence in this case in the record. The daughter tells you that her father had conceived a plan with her, and it is a truly sinister plan of having there be a day when Sadie had brought the boys and the daughter over to visit their dad, and then when they figured out that Sadie was gone to visit her new love life, then those children would be returned. And when those children would be returned, the daughter would make a call to her father saying, fraudulently, falsely, well, I don't know where mom is, we are abandoned. And then he would falsely save the day. He would report this. She would be a child neglect mom because of the false information and the horrible use of an 11-year-old girl.
Where's the proof that this happened? We don't have any proof. We have a young girl who is known to not always tell the truth. Somebody asked me about that, by the way, where I found that out, and it is in the interrogation with the police and Zachariah Anderson, and that's the majority of what they talk about is how she lies in their in the interrogation, and then by the end they're just like, okay, you're going to the clink because we think you're stalking your ex. So I don't know, what do you guys think about that?
To accomplish his sinister aims. Who comes up with a plan like that? Who offers that as something that an 11-year-old should do for them? What sort of mind is capable of putting that plan and that use of an 11-year-old out into the atmosphere as something real? And I suggest to you it's the same person.
Did you see that?
Who could commit.
Did you see that? He just said Sadie twice. Let's rewind. I saw him mouth it twice. Listen to what Gravely's asking and listen to what...
Something that an 11-year-old should do for them. What sort of mind is capable of putting that plan and that use of an 11-year-old out into the atmosphere as something real? And I suggest to you it's the same person
Sadie.
who could commit and did commit this homicide. So what other evidence do I have that, this is a obsessive planner, knows no limits? Well, what about the daughter telling you that when she was urged to peek in that window at her mother, when her mother, a consenting adult, did not have the children over, I'm talking about April 24th, when Rosalio is over at Sadie's home, it's the evening, neither of them have their kids with them, they're consenting adults, and they're in the living room. And when the daughter peeks up over that into the window to look in at her mother, which the father has urged her to do, the defendant tells her, think about this as a small snapshot in this case. He tells her, hey, keep your shirt up so that you don't steam up the glass, so that you can't be detected from inside. Who would even have ever thought of that? What sort of an obsessive planner has that in their brain to share to an 11-year-old? Who is there who is already thinking about cover-ups and avoiding detection in that kind of profound way? It's a snapshot, right? It's just a little moment. And, of course, it is the kind of thing I suggest to you an 11, 12-year-old would never have the capability of giving that kind of detail in a lie or frame up or some kind of false story that she was put up to. Think about all the computer files that this defendant has that are about Rosalio Gutierrez and the high amount of planning that is. All those snapshots that he stored on his computer, all the lookups he had done of this individual, and didn't just peek at them, stored them. Had a file for them. Had a file where he included the picture of the tracker. What about buying trackers at a point where you feel like you're losing control of Sadie Beecham and even though you have another girlfriend that you are wanting her to have no one in her life? The buying of the tracker itself is a sign of a planner who's willing to put a lot of obsessive effort into this. And then what about May 13th? You get your directions on your phone. Your phone puts you on May 13th right where Rosalio Gutierrez lives. and then you text Sadie the same sentence that has just come out of Rosalio's mouth. So you're overhearing from right on that patio what's being said inside, okay? Doesn't that yell out to you as a jury that that's a dry run, that that's a reconnaissance mission to figure out what the terrain is, so that the next time you come down, just 4 days later, you don't have to have your phone, right? You already know now how to get there. You've got the directions from your prior visit. You know how close your van will have to be when you kill this man to be able to remove his body from that location. You already have had a chance to think about and put together a plan that is informed. This is the planner that is necessary to carry out the plan of what you have heard about the evidence that happened on May 17th. And you know that this is a highly planned incident. You know that because the defendant leaves his phone behind in Mequon. But he's also off the grid. He's not answering or texting or web searching. There's none of the usual activity happening on his phone. But he leaves it. And what that tells you folks, knowing this obsessive planner in terms of the other glimpses we get at him, is that this is done for a purpose. Because he must be able to cloak where he goes, to hide where he goes, because of what he will do next. And so if that is the plan, of course he brings gloves. Okay? Of course he brings the weapons he needs to be able to accomplish this murder. Of course he brings the tools that he will need to dispose of this body, right? The bags, any other tools he needs to finish that. Of course, this obsessive planner, this person, will have already thought about what the location is that he will place this body. What the dumpster is, or what the location is, will be something that has no connection to him, that does not require him to in any way deviate from any kind of timetable or plan. All of those things will have been thought over. Is it an accident that he picks a day of a heavy rainstorm when people aren't going to be out and about, or certainly aren't going to remain out and about? I would suggest it is not an accident. So what happens? Well, the first thing we know is that in that hallway of Rosalio's apartment, the blood tells a story. And I'm going to suggest to you a reasonable thought process for you is it tells a story of a blitz attack in that hallway. Someone hiding, ringing a doorbell, probably having no idea that Rosalio is expecting company, right? And so is a person who's going to be prone to open the door. But it is going to be somebody who Rosalio doesn't know. Because you're not going to blitz that person in the hallway and cause all that blood if...
That's not necessarily true. He might not even answer the door for someone he doesn't know. You know what I mean? Like, he could still answer the door for someone he knows, and then someone he knows could surprise him with something to the back of the head.
If you know him, you're going to be inside. You're going to figure out a way inside to get yourself into a more private location. So it's going to be someone who will not be welcome and who you don't know. Rosalio doesn't know. And so you know from the evidence in this case that there are at least 2 blows, blunt force trauma blows. A hard object hitting Rosalio Gutierrez in a way that makes him bleed. And not only makes him bleed, but makes his blood fly into the air to hit doors. And you know that when that blood flies, that door in the hallway is open. So Rosalio has not yet managed to go back in or to close that door when he is first attacked. And so that is the blitz attack that evidence leads you to. Remember that Officer Van Wee told you that he knows that door was still open at some of the points that the blunt force trauma blows are happening because there's blood on the interior of the entry part of the door. And that when that door is
inside the door jamb
closed, that either in the hallway or inside, that part of the door would not be exposed. So you know there's a blitz attack. And you know there's a couple of blows that happen out there. And then you know whoever is the attacker, the defendant in this case, the planner, needs to get himself in that apartment. And why is that? Well, he needs to get himself in there because 2 neighbors, at least, may start to hear a ruckus, right? A neighbor, when she is talked to in some detail, when it's not just a cursory sort of canvas, but when she's talked to in some detail, says after 9 or around 9, I hear a scream in the hallway of pain and surprise at a time period right around May 17th. Marissa Swanigan, who testified, told you between 10 and 11 on May 17th, I heard a loud banging for about 5 minutes against my living room wall. Something big was forced up against the wall. Now the defendant knows that he's...
But that statement changed because originally, remember, she said it was the 18th during the day, in the middle of the day that she heard that. And then after the prosecution talked to her, she changed her statement.
Gotta hurry, okay? The blunt force trauma attack to get Rosalio Gutierrez in a position where he can be killed, that blunt force attack has to be finished as quickly and efficiently as possible because the defendant has no idea whether someone will come any moment soon. All of his preparation needs to be hurried. And so there are continuing blows. There's another blow now on the inside at the door that is a blunt force trauma. Again, blood flies onto the wall, onto part of the ceiling. Over by the dining room table, so a few steps further into the apartment, over on the wall over there, there's a table over there, and that also has a blow that is suffered right by it. And then there are additional blows at that table right at the entryway, and then another blow at the couch. These are all blunt force trauma blows, and Officer Van Wee said conservatively there have to be at a minimum 6 of those based on their locations and the differing blood that has splashed and spattered onto the blinds and all those surfaces and the ceiling and the wall. 6 blows of attack. But blunt force trauma is not an efficient way to end someone's life, right? You can immobilize someone. Maybe they'll die eventually. It is not an efficient way to quickly end someone.
How does he know there were 6 blows of attacks? Let me go back. You can't be sure of that.
Additional blows at that table right at the entryway, and then another blow at the couch. These are all blunt force trauma blows.
I don't know that.
Officer Van Wee said conservatively there have to be at a minimum 6 of those based on their locations and the differing blood that has splashed and spattered onto the blinds and all those surfaces and the ceiling and the wall.
Which is not a very reliable science. The spatter analysis.
6 blows of attack. But blunt force trauma is not an efficient way to end someone's life, right? You can immobilize someone. Maybe they'll die eventually. It is not an efficient way to quickly end someone's life. So I'd suggest to you that the rest of the evidence in this case is certainly consistent with someone then changing weapons. And one of the things we know is that at least the handle of the object that was the blunt force trauma instrument, right, whether it's a bat or an axe with a wooden handle, whatever, some kind of hammer with a wooden handle, whatever that first blunt force trauma object is, we know that there's such magnitude of blows, such force, whatever, that wood shatters. You know that the blows being administered to Rosalio Gutierrez eventually shatter that wood, because there's a shard of that wood that you see that has hair of Rosalio Gutierrez on it and blood of Rosalio Gutierrez on it. Literally something that certainly seemed like impacted his head, right? And there are other shards of wood found at other locations, right? On the couch, there's a couple of shards of wood. So we know that particular weapon got busted. And so some new weapon likely was employed. And I suggest to you a knife or a sharp object makes perfect sense. There's arterial spray, which is...
How do we know that? That's you speculating.
Something that happens if you puncture an artery, which a sharp object will efficiently do for you and cause a spray. Not the same blunt force trauma splashes and spatters and stains, but a different one. And often if you stab someone in their vital organs, because it's close to them, and if they're down and not fighting anymore, all you will have is blood flow and the drips and draining of their life out of their body. And so there would be no other and distinct evidence of this murder when you turn to the knife. And when you finish Rosalio Gutierrez, because he no longer in any way, shape, or form is able to fend off any blows. You have to hurry. People have already heard a little bit of a ruckus. You have to hurry. You have to finish him. And so you finish him and maybe get a little arterial spray, some blood drips. Your plan, the defendant's plan, was to make it look like he disappeared. And so he was going to stage this in a way that made it look like maybe this is a disappearance. And eventually people would figure that out, but that...
Zach looks so bored. I bet he's so sick of hearing Gravely speak, because I know I am.
that would buy some time, right? It's a Sunday night. This guy might be working in the morning. People might be coming over to his house first thing in the morning. How am I buying time would be your first plan. And so you are trying to create a plan. The defendant, the planner, is saying, I'm going to try to stage this. But there's just so much blood, folks. And he's got to hurry. So he grabs up the wood pieces he can grab, but he misses one or two, right? He straightens up a couple of pieces of furniture that either fell over or got, repositioned as Rosalio Gutierrez is staggering, or maybe even, trying somehow to fend some blows off. Those moments of quick staging occur. You had an idea already, and so you follow through on taking his credit cards and his phone. You don't want to leave with those. You are afraid that those leaving might give some clue to where you've gone next, right? But if you hide them in the freezer, the battery will die quick. And there's a high likelihood that at least for a period of time, if somebody doesn't have their phone present, if somebody doesn't have their credit cards present, maybe they just left, right? So your half attempt to stage a disappearance, the defendant still chose to follow through on. Of course, the problem is there's just so much blood. And this staged disappearance will not allow you to leave that area rug, which is so saturated with blood, that some of that blood, before it was moved, has already spilled off into a larger pool that remains on the side of where that rug was. But what do? You take his glasses, because if a guy disappears, of course he takes his glasses. You take his boots, right, or a pair of his shoes. You take some footwear, because of course if somebody disappears, they took that. So you take some basics to make sure you've staged it, but you got to take the rug. And you brought supplies to be ready for this, right? You have...
What basics were taken of his? Where does that even come from? What basics of Rosalio's were taken to hide, to make it seem like that he's gone, that he took off on his own? What is he even...
Made sure that you're going to minimize any kind of problems you'll have in your van and all that, but you didn't bargain for that much blood on the rug. And so you've figured out how you're going to transport him over. I don't know if you're using a tool or if you're just lifting him yourself. Whatever way you are moving that body that you've planned for, the body of Rosalio Gutierrez, wrapped in a rug, utilizing the duct tape and the rope that you brought, that your own daughter said was down in your basement when she left on this very same weekend. Using those supplies, you are leaving. But when you take this unwieldy, dead man, when you take him and you place him in the very back of your van, Rosalio Gutierrez and his DNA splash up. When you take him and you set him down, there's the tiniest of splashes. It's on the passenger side, halfway up that console.
You set him to... Okay, you just heave a almost 300-pound man over your shoulder and drag him out to your van, and then you don't get blood anywhere but this tiny little speck that bounces off of him and goes onto the side panel of the van. Seriously? This is their theory. Does it make sense? How did a jury ever come back with the guilty? I don't know.
There's the tiniest speck of a splash that falls off as you set Rosalio Gutierrez's body down. It's almost imperceptible, but it's there, and it's in exactly the same location as the cutout carpet as that body was stored.
The section of carpet was like this big. It would not cover or, be any use for a human-sized body at 300 pounds in your van. It's going to take up the whole back of your van, not just this little tiny piece of carpet and then a couple bleach spots over here, and keep the rest of your van filthy while you're at it. Get out of here. This is so ridiculous.
And in the end, it reveals much of what a jury needs to know. So, while Rosalio Gutierrez is still wet with blood, while that carpet is still wet with blood, before it dries, when it would still be wet enough to splash because it's been seconds or a very few minutes since Rosalio Gutierrez shed that blood, that's when that speck of blood tumbles to that location in your van.
Just one little tiny speck. That's it. That's all. Just one little tiny speck splashed up. If there was that much blood that, like you said, how is there only one tiny little piece? One tiny little speck. It was barely perceptible.
And because you planned it, you do exactly what we would expect you to do, right? You wore footwear, maybe the steel-toed boots that you borrowed from your grandpa working at the tree farm just a day before. Maybe you wore those. You took them off. You put on some other footwear. You, of course, have now taken off your gloves. You've taken off that outer garment, that same plaid, sort of very light sort of outer garment that both your daughter and Sadie say was the last thing they saw you wearing in the late afternoon on the very same day that Rosalio goes missing. So just they saw you wearing about 4 and a half hours before Rosalio's death. You take those items off, and of course you package them up. This is your plan. You're not going to operate your vehicles with those things still on you. You've planned this, just like you left your phone at home. And so an investigation that is hoping that you were not a planner, an investigation that was expecting that you were not prepared for those type of basic things, is never going to detect you in that situation, right? Only things that are going to detect you are the things you could not have planned for, things you could not have intended. Now, you get home right away, okay? And I'm going to talk about the timing in a few minutes here and how absolutely impossible it would be for the timing to fit together this well and you'd be an innocent man. But you're home by 11:19 p.m. You've been radio silent. You've been off the grid for more than, for about almost 4 hours. Now you're on the phone. You're constantly on the phone from 11:19 to about 1 a.m. And so you are establishing your credibility and your bona fide that I've been here. Okay, just like your plan was. You got back home almost immediately so that you could be sure that if anybody ever looked at you, that you were accounted for in a way that was helpful.
How did he do the crime, wait for Rosalio to be sufficiently ended, and then clean up, basically, you know, taking the weapon and the body with him and the carpet? How did he do all of that within the hour and 9 minutes or whatever he had to do it in? Because that's when he was back at home, his phone was pinging and he was calling people and texting people. So how did he do all that in such a short time when his drive itself was like an hour long? The answer is he didn't. That's how.
To you. But then after 1 o'clock, you're again off the grid for about 3 hours. Okay, now it's the middle of the night, so a lot of people are doing nothing during that period of time, right? But from 1 to 4, you're off the grid, and that gives you plenty of time to dispose of Rosalio Gutierrez's body in the planned location and to do some of the cleanup. Now, maybe you're in a dark location. Maybe you can't do all the cleanup you wanted. Maybe you find that when you start to do the cleanup, that some of the blood has actually saturated through whatever you thought was going to contain it, and it's actually seeped into part of the carpeting and matting in the back of your van. Okay? So maybe you are finding that plan A is not going to be exactly workable. And so maybe you didn't have the tools for that bit of your preparation now not working perfectly. And so by 4 a.m., you are again trying to figure out where you can get cleaning materials early. And so you end up at Walmart and you buy more rubber gloves and more garbage bags and cleaning supplies, and you go to a location for 3 hours where it's people with family connections to you. It's a location you know no one else is going to be at, and you can finish your cleanup, again bagging all the items, again being meticulous about making sure that you don't leave any evidence. Oops. And of course, at your own house, over the next couple of days, you must run that fire pit and start to destroy some of the rest of the evidence. Because even when you do the cleanup, right, even when you do the cleanup, you are concerned that maybe the personal clothing that you are wearing will somehow be able to be tied to you, right? If somebody finds some of this stuff in a dumpster or buried somewhere or somewhere controlled, you can't leave your clothes, which is certainly going to have your DNA on it, right? Your pants, your socks, the boots you were wearing. You've got to get rid of those in a way that is DNA proof. And you know how you do that? You do that with fire. You burn those things.
This is the bleach stain in the back of his car, in his van. The rest of the carpet looks filthy. That bleach wouldn't... I don't think if there was BLOOD in that carpet, it would not have gone to this such a light color, I don't believe. Like, I don't think that that's the color it would make with the product bleach to clean it up. But I just wanted to go over these again and see, here's where the carpeting was cut out. That would not even cover partially Rosalio's body if he's a 270-pound man. And look at the state of this van. It is filthy. It is not, it's a work van. It's beat up. He uses it. Okay, he's got cologne. Oh well. Oh no, he does 5 energy hour drinks. This car is not a clean car. But yeah, and we heard in the defense's case, my last episode, the woman who worked with Lisa Treffinger to analyze this car and to process it, she said she did not find any BLOOD in this car whatsoever. So, and the luminol and the other testing, the other presumptive testing, all came back negative. So I just wanted to bring that back up because he's talking about the carpet and the bleach, which there's no way that there was a body in that van days before taking these pictures. I don't know what kind of investigators they have in Kenosha.
So that no DNA will ever exist. Okay, so that's why the burning pit is going on in the rainstorm for a couple of days. Because you're burning steel-toed boots. And we find at the very top of that burn pile steel toes and shoelaces, right? You burn your underwear, and we find a fragment of your underwear. You burn your jeans, and we find
Oh, no.
some buttons. In fact, you might even burn 2 pairs of jeans, right? Because you might have changed jeans once from the time you committed the offense and then when you did the cleaning of the van.
So that's their explanation as to why there's 2 buttons, 2 Levi buttons. That's their explanation. You changed your clothes into another pair of jeans. So you got 2 pairs of jeans dirty.
Second situation. So you might even you might even need to burn multiple pairs of jeans. And you burn socks, right? The ones you wore when you wore those boots. And so at the very top of your fire pit, there's bleach, and there's those kind of clothes consistent with that set of garments that you could have, okay?
Whoops. Ah, crap.
The very same day that Rosalio goes missing, so just they saw you wearing about 4 hours before, 4.5 hours before Rosalio's death. You take those items off, and of course you package them up. This is your plan. You're not going to operate your vehicles with those things still on you. You've planned this, just like you left your phone at home. And so an investigation that is hoping that you were not a planner, an investigation that was expecting that you were not prepared for those type of basic things, is never going to detect you in that situation. Right? Only things that are going to detect you are the things you could not have planned for, things you could not have intended. Now, you get home right away, okay? And I'm going to talk about the timing in a few minutes here and how absolutely impossible it would be for the timing to fit together this well and you be an innocent man. But you're home by 11:19 p.m. You've been radio silent. You've been off the grid for for about almost 4 hours.
Oh no. Sometimes I'm off the grid for 4 hours. Sometimes I take naps for 4 hours, and I know he didn't sleep at night. So when he said that he took a nap, it's absolutely believable. Because he was talking to Christine Remsburg about how he missed his nap. So he probably, something. So he probably fell asleep early, is what he was getting at with why he didn't go over there. Because he was supposed to have plans, I guess, to go over to her house or something. I don't remember. It doesn't make him guilty. But here we go.
Now you're on the phone. You're constantly on the phone from 11:19 to about 1 a.m. And so you are establishing your credibility and your bona fide that I've been here. Okay? Just like your plan was. You got back home almost immediately so that you could be sure that if anybody ever looked at you, that you were accounted for in a way that was helpful to you. But then after 1 o'clock, you're again off the grid for about 3 hours. Okay? Now it's the middle of the night, so a lot of people are doing nothing during that period of time, right? But from 1 to 4, you're off the grid, and that gives you plenty of time to dispose of Rosalio Gutierrez's body in the planned location and to do some of the cleanup. Now, maybe you're in a dark location. Maybe you can't do all the cleanup you wanted. Maybe you find that when you start to do the cleanup, that some of the blood has actually saturated through whatever you thought was going to contain it, and it's actually seeped into part of the carpeting and matting in the back of your van. Okay? So maybe you are finding that Plan A is not going to be exactly workable. And so maybe you didn't have the tools for that bit of your preparation now not working perfectly. And so by 4 a.m., you are again trying to figure out where you can get cleaning materials early. And so you end up at Walmart and you buy more rubber gloves and more garbage bags and cleaning supplies, and you go to a location for 3 hours where it's people with family connections to you. It's a location you know no one else is going to be at, and you can finish your cleanup, again bagging all the items, again being meticulous about making sure that you don't leave any evidence. And of course, at your own house, over the next couple of days, you must run that fire pit and start to destroy some of the rest of the evidence. Because even when you do the cleanup, right, you are concerned that maybe the personal clothing that you are wearing will somehow be able to be tied to you, right? If somebody finds some of this stuff in a dumpster or buried somewhere or somewhere controlled, you can't leave your clothes, which is certainly going to have your DNA on it, right? Your pants, your socks, the boots you were wearing. You've got to get rid of those in a way that is DNA proof. And you know how you do that? You do that with fire. You burn those things so that no DNA will ever exist.
Or you could just live a little ways away from, garbage pickup on a regular basis because you're out in the boonies and you decide, hey, I'm going to save myself some money and trips to the dump by just burning my stuff.
Okay, so that's why the burning pit is going on in the rainstorm for a couple of days, because you're burning steel-toed boots. And we find at the very top of that burn pile steel toes and shoelaces, right? You burn your underwear, and we find a fragment of your underwear. You burn your jeans, and we find some buttons. And in fact, you might even burn 2 pairs of jeans, right? Because you might have changed jeans once from the time you committed the offense and then when you did the cleaning of the van in that second situation. So you might even need to burn multiple pairs of jeans. And you burn socks, right? The ones you wore when you wore those boots. And so at the very top of your fire pit, there's bleach, and there's those kind of clothes consistent with that set of garments that you could have. Okay? Those things are found in the fire pit. I want to talk about some of the major witnesses in this case for just a second, because I think that I want to have you hear me talk about sort of how I think they responded on the stand and where they sit in terms of your ability to adopt what they have said. So I want to speak first about Sadie Beecham, okay, who was, I think in every way you heard her, right, on the stand, confronted on cross-examination, in her texts, on the phone when you heard recordings of her. She is part scared, part at wit's end. She is frustrated. There are times she is trying to appease and make nice with the defendant. There are times she's trying to just manage a conversation, just trying to say anything she can to end the endless string of texts or end the hours-long phone calls. And in the meantime...
No, she doesn't. She doesn't try to stop it. She doesn't try to, she doesn't tell him, please stop texting me, stop whatever. She says something to him like, stop stalking me or whatever at one point, because he said something. I don't remember what it was, but he didn't even know what she was talking about. So she started telling him, like, you've been stalking me and doing all this stuff. Like, she became paranoid. Like, he thought that she might be on illegal substances. Suddenly, has a taste for some illegal substances, and now she's, cranky, and she has withdrawals, and she's not the same person she used to be. She goes out drinking and all this stuff. So I don't know. You tell me what you guys think.
There are family issues, right? There are a couple things happening in their lives which do not allow her to cut off all contact with the defendant. Do not allow her to have some rule that says, when I tell you you're not welcome in my house, that means you can never, ever be over here because I need help sometimes with my...
You want him out of your life, but you want him to help you. You can't have your cake and eat it too, Sadie. And that's what she's trying. But anyways, yeah. So, at no point did she ever act like she wanted him out of her life. She didn't even act like they were done. So how is he supposed to know? I mean, she did, but at times I feel like she gave him different vibes. That's all I'm gonna say.
My daughter. And so she is a woman just trying to have something of her own. She's trying to have some relationship in her life that is not about the defendant. And he deals with that with such obsession, with such hostility, with such fury, that she tries every strategy that anyone has ever come up with to try to deal with that. And that's exactly how you folks on the jury would expect someone who's being stalked and who is being dealt with in that way day after day to behave. Sometimes she wants to curse at him. Sometimes she wants to try to say nice things to see if that'll work. Sometimes she wants him out of her house. Sometimes she needs him to help on something. This is real, but it doesn't mean that it's not overwhelming, oppressive, and something that she is truly scared of. I want to talk about the daughter in this case, who now is 14 years old, right? So you heard a 14-year-old who was, I think I'm going to call her sassy, who was courageous, who was absolutely adamant. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, absolutely adamant about the things she told you, about things like that the back of that van was not cut out when I last saw the back of that van on the weekend of the 16th and 17th of May. Like that my father made me his spy, that he stole things from the car. All of those things she said. She was adamant about those things. When challenged by the defense, she gave extra details that she remembered, and she, in tone and in bravery, made it absolutely clear to you as a jury that she is her own person and that she knows what she is talking about. Now, is she perfect? Did she say exactly the same thing in exactly the same order as she did back in 2020? That would be impossible to do. As a 12-year-old and now 14, of course, some time has passed, right? But as to everything that truly matters, you will see a couple of things that were inconsistent, and they will not be things that for you truly matter. Was she coached? Was it?
So he admits that her testimony was inconsistent. I mean, yes, she's a child, and you don't expect her to have the most reliable memory, I guess, or perception of her memory. But, I don't know.
any of what she did something where an adult has ordered her or dominated her to provide that information, I would suggest to you she's the exact opposite of the personality of some 14-year-old who can be coached in terms of what she will say. Exact opposite. I want to talk about Marquand Washington, the inmate who came and told you what the defendant told him when they had a cell together for about a little more than 5 weeks. And I want to contrast him with Mr. McAtee, the inmate that the defense called to talk about Marquand Washington. And I think it's constructive to talk about them together for a second to talk about what matters in terms of your thinking about and assessing that information. So Marquand Washington knew the defendant's home was in Mequon. He knew it was a home in poor condition in a rich area. That appears to be the case. He knew details about the defendant's family that have been unchallenged in this case. He knew about circumstances of the case which are sort of unimportant circumstances, but they're details that might lead you to understand that he has insider information. So what do I mean? Well, he says in the raid that the police found a lot of cash. The police found $47,000 plus, but only a little bit of weed. Okay? And sure enough, that is a summary that would be accurate.
But he could get that by looking at the discovery or looking at his case files, whatever. He doesn't necessarily just get that from talking to Zach.
In some, from some perspectives about what happened in a collateral part of the case. So these are the kind of details. He knew what his job was. He knew he'd worked for, in construction and in cable, laying cable. So these are things that Marquand Washington knew about the background of the defendant. So he knew some personal facts. And then he talked about what, of course, he told him about the offense, and he told him this was a private conversation. No word was ever said to me where another person was ever present. He only told me a few of the facts. He did not outline everything that happened in the case. He also told the defendant all sorts of details about his case. You heard Marquand Washington say he's never cooperated before. So this is the first time he's ever done this. And again, that is unchallenged in this case, that he has not been a person who from a jail has ever informed on an individual before. There's absolutely no evidence of any other cooperation along those lines, where in the context of hearing something in a jail, he decided to do something with it. He also told you that if he lies, if he's caught in a lie in this case, that the agreement that he currently has will be eliminated, will be destroyed. So really, he is at huge risk if Marquand Washington decides to say anything that is false in this case. He's at huge risk to have everything that he's hoping for in a federal agreement be destroyed. So here's the contrast with Mr. McAtee. And I think it's so helpful that you got a chance to see Mr. McAtee, because now you get a chance to evaluate what a jailhouse sort of operator looks like in contrast to what Mr. Washington gave you and showed you. Okay? So they're similar. They both have a federal case, right? So they have...
So he's turning the allegations now around on Nicholas McAtee.
Surface similarity. Mr. McAtee has 11 priors. But Mr. McAtee has 2 recent-in-time situations where he has fraudulently caused pretend legal mail, so pretend documents, to be sent into the jail where he was fraudulently involved in this under attorneys' names. So there would be these innocent human beings on the planet who would be supposedly the person who sent these documents into the jail, and they would have drugs in them. So theoretically, 2 other human beings, in this case lawyers, right, would be individuals who would be, of course, under high suspicion, right, of having caused drugs to come into the jail. And what Mr. McAtee admitted to you is, yes, I was involved in those plans. In the second one, after he's caught the first time, he actually goes to the legal computer in the jail and completely forges a legal envelope and the legal mail. In both cases, he uses cellmates, okay, people he's been incarcerated with, as part of his fraud. So you know about Mr. McAtee that in the jail setting, he is a documented forger and person who's trying to fraudulently do things, that he's willing to risk totally innocent parties in that fraud, and that he forms alliances with fellow inmates to do things that are not proper in these circumstances.
I'm sure a lot of prisoners do that because you got to do what you got to do to survive. And when you're in a rough situation like that, you got to do whatever it is that you got to do. And if people need you to act hard and tough because that's what you got to do in prison, then that's what you do. But, and I assume Zach is probably doing the same, because you got to act, people expect you to act a certain way in that role. You're a prisoner now, you got to act like one. Unfortunately. I'm not saying that Zach's doing illegal things or anything, but I am saying, like, when you're in that situation and your survival is at risk, your freedoms, your livelihood, your everything is being taken from you. Um, and then to top it off, you're in a rough situation with individuals who could legitimately end your life if they don't like you for whatever reason, any reason. So I feel for people in that situation, especially innocent individuals, but also individuals who probably get pushed to their limits to do things that they might not want to do, but they do it to survive. Anybody watch Orange is the New Black? That's you got to do what you got to do to survive, man. That's a crazy show, but it was pretty good. Anyways, let's move on, or let's keep going with Gravely's closing here.
Does not sound like somebody who could be relied upon. What else do we know about Mr. McAtee? Well, he was asked, he claimed that he had a deal that he'd been offered by the state. When surprise was expressed about that, as I recall it, the judge asked his attorney, who was in the gallery. And his attorney said, no, there's no deal. So Mr. McAtee was contradicted by his own lawyer about the circumstances of his coming to testify in front of you while he was here.
He wasn't lying. There is something potentially in the works. It just isn't finalized yet. And they said that. And the judge even rephrased it and said, there isn't a deal as of yet. I remember him saying it that way specifically because they said it could, potentially help him with his case if there was a deal with the prosecution or whatever.
I don't know how more clear it can be that Mr. McAtee cannot be relied on by you for any information. And then finally, Mr. McAtee, and I tried to be very careful when I did this under cross-examination. I asked Mr. McAtee, so tell me where this man was who was yelling to you or telling you in above a conversational voice, essentially giving you a tutorial on how to be a snitch in the jail. And he said, I was in the upper tier, as was this other gentleman, okay, this person he's talking to. We can't see each other because there's mesh there. The cell fronts are obscured, but we're talking and he's across from me, upstairs. Well, when we looked into it, Marquand Washington was never upstairs. So, again, the most basic reported fact by Mr. McAtee is false. Whoever he had a conversation...
He might not remember correctly. He might have been in the hole several times and he doesn't remember.
...with across from him is not Marquand Washington. If that conversation ever took place, he's got...
And we heard on testimony that they were both... he was in 9 and Marquand was in 9 and McAtee was in 11. So they were near each other.
...the wrong guy based on where he told you this person was located. Because Marquand Washington moved in a couple of different places, but he was always... there was never a time he was in that upper tier. Okay? McAtee is just plain wrong about the basic detail that he tried to give you. In fact, you saw the pictures. They're on the complete opposite ends for all but 6 hours of the time they're together. And even then...
He also admitted that when they have rec time, they're able to talk to one another. That the individuals within the whole all have rec time together and they can socialize. So, okay, so maybe he socialized with Marquand at rec time.
They're not on the same tier. So literally, you'd have to have a situation where guys who are all the way across from each other, where Marquand Washington is willing in the security part of the jail. Remember, these are people who've already misbehaved in the jail. Is that the environment where you think it's at all reasonable to believe that Marquand Washington, a guy as careful as he sounded in this courtroom, is going to scream out instructions on how to get yourself out of a case, how to be a snitch, with other inmates obviously able to hear that same thing, when McAtee himself told you federal inmates who snitch are in danger? So why would Marquand Washington advertise that? And remember, Marquand Washington had never cooperated at the time this was talked about. So you'd have to believe he was literally giving advice, even though they got the location wrong. He was literally giving advice on something he had never done that would put him in mortal danger. And your authority on that is a guy who's fraudulently sent legal mail to get drugs 2 times using other inmates.
What did Marquand Washington do? He did things too to get in prison. I mean, they're not neither one of them are the most reliable sources, I'll say. So the jury has to decide who they find to be more reliable.
Okay, so I also want to talk about the 3 crime lab analysts for just a second, right? So you have Lisa Treffinger, Ron Watucky, and Julie Avila. You have more than 70 years experience at the state crime lab. All 3 of them tell you, and this is undisputed, there's no competing evidence in this case, all 3 of them tell you that stain in that van, okay, it's A1 in their lab stuff, right? A1, that stain in the van of the defendants, is blood. Every one of them offered you the opinion it's blood. 70 years of experience, okay?
They said it looked like it could be, but none of them said definitively that it was, except Lisa Treffinger.
People who go to crime scenes as their job every day over many of the years of their careers. Okay? 3 different experts tell you it's blood. 2 of them also tell you, so now you also know, again, undisputed, it's the DNA of Rosalio Gutierrez. So it's blood, and it's undisputed evidence in this case that that is the DNA of Rosalio Gutierrez. Lisa Treffinger, an expert on this field, tells you that she did the testing. Ronald Watucky, who reviewed those findings, told you about his conclusions about this case. And then 2 of these 3 experts are asked, and so now this is Ron Watucky and Julie Avila. What else can you tell us about this speck, this red brownish speck in the van? And those 2 individuals, Ronald Watucky, who's been working at the state crime lab since before they started doing DNA, and Julie Avila, who has 22 years there, said, we've seen lots of blood. Not only does it look like blood, but it looks like it is splashed on there. In other words, it is not transferred blood. Again, this is their expert opinion. It hasn't been smudged on there or wiped on there. It's not, in other words, something someone planted there.
They never said that this was definitive either, or that it was definitely BLOOD.
It's splashed on. When that blood was still wet, it's splashed on.
That one tiny little speck of blood.
3 crime lab analysts give you such important evidence in this case. Okay, so we talked about how this evidence is organized. We talked about what the evidence is. The burden of proof is on the state in each and every aspect of this case. Okay, so in no way let any argument I have said in any way, shape, or form indicate to you that there's any other burden of proof but the state of Wisconsin, each and every element. You're allowed to consider the evidence and organize the evidence in any way you want, right? You can think about it and organize it as a group and in your own minds in any way you want. And I'm going to ask you to think about the evidence in this way as one of the ways you do consider it. Could all of the things I'm now going to go through, could all of them be true for an innocent man who is falsely accused? Could an innocent person falsely accused have all of the things I'm about to outline to you happen to them? Is that in any way reasonable? Is my question to you. Okay? So, Rosalio Gutierrez is murdered on May 17th, 2020. His body's found on May 19th, 2020. Okay?
Whoa. They just said his body was found on 19th. No, it was not.
And falsely accused, this should have 0 effect on him, right? He lives in Mequon. That is an hour's drive away. There's absolutely no way the death of a person in Kenosha should impact him in any way, innocent and falsely accused. Okay? Now, here's where it starts to get more and more unlucky for him, more and more unreasonable for him to not be the person who committed this offense, right? Because it turns out that this person, who should be a random person in the life of the defendant, is actually the first man that Sadie has dated since she ended her long-time relationship with you. Okay? So now we have, it's not just a random city, it is the guy who Sadie has been Sadie's first kind of real, some kind of relationship since she broke it off with you. Okay, again, if you're an innocent guy, you're falsely accused, you have your own girlfriend, you're not, you've said you're not jealous in any way, this really shouldn't impact you, right? This is a guy she's dating, but so what? It should have 0 reason to cause you any concern or be a problem, a situation that's a problem for you.
Well, he still cares about Sadie, or at least at this point he had still been caring for her and had feelings for her, still loved her, still, wished for a different outcome between the 2 of them. So, I don't know. It's not unheard of for him to be upset that she's seeing someone else. That doesn't necessarily mean he went and ended his life.
However, here's a problem for you. Here's where it starts to be so unfortunate if you're an innocent man and falsely accused, right? Because even though you have a girlfriend, even though you are not a jealous guy about this new relationship Sadie has, when the police start to do digging, they find all sorts of documentary evidence that you are extremely jealous. There are, for instance, on your own devices, recordings of you talking about how jealous you are, that the state played for you in this case. There are legions of emails that we showed you and texts that show how jealous you are of her relationship. And so, unfortunately for you, there is a body of evidence that documents that even though you have a girlfriend, you are pretty you are very extensively jealous in obsessive ways about what happens in Sadie Beecham's love life. And so here's how unlucky you are. Those kind of obsessive acts of jealousy that you have also begin to show that you don't know any limits. Here's how unlucky you are if you're falsely accused here, right? Because on March 4th, you go into Sadie Beecham's home where her babysitter finds you looming over her, wakes her up before 4 a.m. in the morning. You are screaming about how Sadie Beecham is a whore, and you are accusing the babysitter of being a whore as well in your fury. And it's all about jealousy because Sadie Beecham, who has broken up with you, had the audacity to go on a vacation and not let you know, and she surely is cheating on you. It's got to be that she is cheating on you. And you go wake up you go and wake up your 12-year-old daughter, and by the way, it's a school day that next day, and your 4-year-olds. You go and wake them all up, and you, knowing no limits, make them a breakfast, a 4 a.m. breakfast on a school day. You don't know any limits. And by March 4th, we are already getting a flavor for how you behave when Sadie Beecham refuses to be under your thumb. So it's unlucky that you would have done that just a couple of months before, and somehow Rosalio Gutierrez is murdered on May 17th. But here's how much more unlucky you get. Because that date of May 17th turns out to have a bunch of significance if the person involved in the murder is really focused on Sadie Beecham's love life, right? Because May 17th, the date of the murder, is one day before Sadie Beecham meets Rosalio's kids for the first time. And if you're monitoring Sadie Beecham, if your antenna towards Sadie Beecham is obsessive and controlling, and anything she does hits your antenna like a rocket ship, right? Then when she meets his kids, you have a whole nother degree of concern and fury. And in fact, the day Rosalio Gutierrez is murdered, Sadie Beecham texts Rosalio and says to him in a text, "I would like to take our relationship further." These are the words that the defendant cannot allow. He cannot tolerate these words. He will not let this happen. Is it an accident or just horrible random fortune that Rosalio Gutierrez is murdered at the same time that her obsessive ex would be learning and beginning to find out that all the steps and signs look like she is moving on? Is that an accident? You are horribly unfortunate and as an innocent, falsely accused man if that's the case. And so here's how bad your fortune is if you're innocent and falsely accused. Sadie Beecham, who remains at the scene on the 19th when this bloody scene is discovered, reveals to law enforcement, hey, I think my ex has been monitoring me in a variety of ways out of jealousy. And this should be easily cleared up. Okay? So this should be an opportunity for an innocent, falsely accused man, right? Because the defendant has already told Sadie in a variety of communications, and Sadie herself told you, he's already told me none of these things are true, right? On the 24th, I have a very good excuse for why I was at your house and peeped in, although some of it involves a premonition. On May 8th, I accidentally must have dropped a phone in your car. I never did that on purpose. I'm not monitoring you. And then
Man, I was muted. I just wanted to let you guys know I have my dog, Dexter, my German Shepherd, my buddy, named after Dexter Morgan, which I just found out Kimberlea on her channel over there. She said that she has a Dexter also named after Dexter Morgan, her little dog. So I think that's funny. But anyways, so he has pancreatitis. Poor guy, and sometimes he gets digestive issues, so I gotta run out and take him out, which is what I just did, and now I gotta run back down and let them in. But I just want to let you know, so I'm in and out on occasion.
And on the 13th, it's just pure accident that I texted something to you that's the same thing that Rosalio said. I was never anywhere near you. Okay? So assuming this is true and you're not an obsessive ex who's been doing all these very disturbing things, this should be able to be cleared up. It should be able to be cleared up. Here's how unlucky you are if you're an innocent, falsely accused guy. All of the electronics in this case back up Sadie Beecham. Okay? They back him up. She says, we were videotaped. That's what I've been told. Sure enough, there's video. She says, I believe he was tracking me on May 8th. I don't believe him that he dropped it accidentally. What does his computer show? That he was actually tracking her. not only that, but the places that he tracked her, he took screenshots of those trackings, okay, of that phone, and he put them in the Rosalio Gutierrez file on his computer. So he's lying to her. Okay, he's lying to her about that. And then on May 13th, his phone, his own electronics, puts him in Kenosha at the exact time that that text is made to her that repeats the words Rosalio just said to her. So every time the electronics finds, rather than clearing him, that he's lying. And that those obsessive, boundary-breaking moments are all true. Okay, so here's another horrible piece of luck if you're an innocent guy and falsely accused. After you found out Sadie was seeing someone, you purchased 2 trackers, okay, to track vehicles with no explanation for that is in the record, right? That we don't know of any reason, but it certainly is coincidental timing. And you know, here's one thing that would be lucky for you again. Here's an opportunity you could clear yourself, right? If those 2 trackers could be found, surely they would show that they haven't been mounted on Rosalio's vehicle, they haven't been used to follow him or make sure that you know he's home at certain times or any of that. But one of those 2 trackers can't be found at any of the search warrants. We found 1, but not 2. We ordered 2. We know 2 were delivered based on the electronic information. 1 is missing. What horrible luck if that tracker would have again been able to clear you. Okay, here's horrible luck. Marquand Washington, who you roomed with for 5 weeks, only time he's ever cooperated, says all the things he says, including that you ended up stabbing this man in the end, that you used garbage bags, that you'll never be found, that he'll never be found, and that he suggested the way to kill someone is to surveil them and keep tabs on them and use the devices you can buy, like trackers on Amazon. Here's horrible luck. You yourself bought trackers on Amazon. You yourself have been documented in all the ways we just talked about on each of those days as being involved in surveillance of the victim. So all of the ways you said would be the right way to prep to do a murder, to do a mission of murder, are actually confirmed by your own devices. That's really bad luck. It's horrible luck if you've been falsely accused. Okay, so, you know, here's a moment where you'd think that, you know, that you've been monitoring this guy. You do admit to the police that on April 24th you did peek in the window, but you took your 11-year-old to witness it. Your 11-year-old who was about to turn 12. You took your daughter to witness that. You used her as a tool, as your fellow spy in there. And so, again, you're unlucky because a jury hearing that will know that you don't have any of the limits that they would expect for a person who was innocent and falsely accused. Now, here's another one, right? You're accused by Sadie as part of these accusations of taking items from Rosalio's truck. His registration and a letter to a person named, or from a person named TJ. The daughter also confirms those things. But you didn't do this because you're not jealous and you are not controlling, and of course you do know limits, and you're just being falsely accused. So again, here's a moment where if you're an innocent falsely accused guy, we're going to be able to clear things up, right? Here's a moment where we're going to be able to show, okay, we've now looked at what you did, what you're saying, that you didn't do these things, and we're able to verify. But in fact, just the opposite is true, isn't it? Because what we find in his electronics are, we find that not only right after you would have returned from Sadie's place on April 24th, so in the early morning hours of April 25th, you're already doing searches of Rosalio's Colorado plate and the name of Rosalio's stepdad, a name on your registration document, okay, which was in the truck. So you are searching for a name that you shouldn't have unless you have a document from his truck. And then, again on a device, we find a snippet of that same registration document, which has the stepdad's name on it, and in the defendant's own handwriting, he has the handwritten address of Rosalio Gutierrez. So again, we have a portion of the document you stole from that truck on your electronics. And so we know you're not telling the truth again. And again, we know you're not telling the truth, and you know no limits, and you have obsessive jealousy, and it's focused on Rosalio Gutierrez. Okay, so, you know, again, you claim it was an accidental plant of the phone on May 8th. You know, again, this should be able to be cleared up, but I told you it's on his computer. So again, that shows you're lying, and again, horrible luck if you're an innocent guy falsely accused. Here's horrible luck. You're an innocent man, right? You're not jealous. None of this stuff is true. It's just a horrible set of coincidences and circumstances. But you have a file on your computer that is named Rosalio Gutierrez. You had to write that name on there. And in it is not only a picture of a tracker that you've included in that file, but all sorts of pictures of Rosalio Gutierrez and his kids. On the defendant's computer are pictures of Rosalio Gutierrez and his kids. We passed those through you guys as a jury. Horrible luck if you are not responsible for his death. Horrible luck that you were bothering to put things like pictures of his kids in your computer, that you had to take off of some internet source, right, Facebook or something. You had to screenshot each one of them. You made a choice each time that that was important to you. It was important to store that. No limits on the defendant and his behavior. On May 13th, again, we should be able to clear you on May 13th. Sadie says, listen, he texted me the same thing that Rosalio just said when I was at his place. There's no reason that the defendant should be over at Rosalio's place when I am visiting him on May 13th. Well, your bad luck is that your phone puts you there. At the same time she says that text is being made, your text is the same words she claims are on there, and it sure looks to a jury like you are rehearsing, like this is a dry run for the murder you will commit 4 days later. So here's how your bad luck continues, right? Because there's a crescendo of activity that seems to be leading to a homicide, and it's bad luck that these are things all from you. May 14th, okay, 3 days before the homicide. Do you want me to stop by to meet Junior tonight? Not a little later, half hour later. So you're saying I can stop by and meet someone later? You're taunting Sadie. You're taunting her and thinking gloriously about what will happen when you meet him. Remember what your daughter told us? Remember what she said on the stand? Let me get to that. Let me make sure you guys hear that one more time. She says, my dad said something about showing him who the man was. That sounds like what you're up to on May 14th. May 16th, 1 day before the homicide, folks. 1 day before the homicide. You have the kids over when this text goes out. You're not a jealous guy, right? You're an innocent man falsely accused. And what you're bothering to text Sadie Beecham is, this is 1 day before the homicide. You race down to Kenosha every chance you get to lay down with some Down syndrome Mexican version of your father. That's how you choose to address her 1 day before the death of Rosalio Gutierrez. Awfully, horribly unlucky.
He must have done it then because he said some negative words about the victim. Oh my God. If you don't know that there's a lot of misrepresentations in his closing, like he's pretty compelling. So I can see now, like if you don't know all the inconsistencies of what he's saying, then as a juror, you could easily be swayed, I think, by his closing, potentially. I don't know. What do you guys think?
And inconvenient if you are an innocent man falsely accused. Here's where the bad luck gets profound. Here's where it becomes patently unreasonable for you to believe that the defendant is an innocent man falsely accused. Because on the evening of the murder, okay, around 10 p.m., the defendant's phone, at the exact time period necessary to commit this murder, is off the grid. In fact, all of his devices are off the grid, from 7:30 to 11:19. What are the chances? What are the chances of the exact time period needed to drive to Kenosha, wait for Rosalio Gutierrez to get home at a little after 9, murder him at around 10, and then get yourself back to Mequon? How is it that amount of time is the exact period of time you're off the grid? That would be the worst luck in human history if you were a person who was innocent and falsely accused.
No evidence doesn't make it evidence. Just because he was off the grid doesn't mean that he... Okay.
Here's the absurdity of any conclusion other than that the defendant is involved, okay? Tell me how this portion of bad luck could even exist in the world. The defense put in some evidence about the phone changing position. You remember it went from up to the side? And the time period on that was 10:11 p.m. on May 17th, okay? I'm going to suggest to you by far the most logical reason why that phone would change positions is it's been placed in the freezer, right? That's why it's changed position. It's now being hidden in the freezer at 10:11 p.m., okay? Well, we know from the defendant getting directions on May 13th. Remember you heard the recordings of those directions? That the directions that the defendant got on May 13th were just a minute or two over an hour. 10:11 p.m., the phone changes position and goes in the freezer. You've got to take care of a few more things, right? You've got to straighten up things, maybe pick up some wood. You've already moved the body. Now you're doing the last staging, right? Okay, I'm going to leave the wallet on the couch, but I'm going to put the credit cards on the phone. You're doing those last seconds of staging. So maybe you take a couple minutes to do that. You're home, back in Mequon, answering your phone at 11:19 p.m. An hour and 8 minutes from when that phone changed position.
And it takes an hour and 1 minute to drive. That's without traffic or construction or anything like that, or weather. So, yeah.
Can that be an accident? Is that just horrible luck? That one of the final acts, one of the things that makes sense to have be the final act of your staging, exactly times you to get you back to Mequon to use your phone as quickly as you can, so you're back, so you can start to get your alibi running and going? I would suggest to you the chances of that timing being true for an innocent, falsely accused man with all the rest of what I've said is astronomically impossible. It's impossible. What else? Well, remember, this is an evening. Here's how bad luck it is. Your girlfriend, Miss Remsburg, is expecting you. She is texting and calling you throughout the time you're off the grid saying, hey, thought you were coming over. Here's what I was making. Here's the movie I was planning. Okay, I guess you're not coming. She gets madder and madder as these go on. Clearly does not know you're not arriving. In fact, she said that on the stand. So a night when she expected you, on the very night Rosalio Gutierrez is murdered, you're not in the place where you were expected. And you, even when you do get in contact with her, you have a long call with her around midnight, you still don't go over there. You don't go over to make it up. If she's mad, you don't do any of those things because you need that time to dispose of that body and get rid of evidence. So horribly unlucky that that would happen. Okay, here's something unlucky. It's the 19th now of May. You're arrested, right? You have taken out on May 15th $50,000 from Wells Fargo Bank in 20s. So it's in cash. You still have a little more than $47,000 at your place. And so you're unlucky because a jury could reasonably guess that that's your cash money for if this murder somehow goes wrong, right? You have an escape fund that is ready. You are ready before.
Sorry, guys. Bear with me 1 second. I had to rush the dog out. Sorry about that. So here we are with this is going to be the defense's closing argument.
I just want to echo what Mr. Gravely said earlier, because we do share the sentiment that you've given us your time. You've taken time out of your lives. You've gone much further than we thought we were going to take in this case, and you've been incredibly patient. And it's a very important thing when we're talking about how jury trials function in our society and why they are so very important. And I know that all of you take your duty very seriously and have steadfastly taken an oath to do your duty properly. In our country, of course, it's part of our system that we don't leave it up to a prosecutorial agency or any one individual or even just law enforcement collectively to determine whether or not somebody is guilty of a charged offense. We bring in people from the community that have no bias, have no predisposed opinion about what the outcome should be, and we ask you to listen to testimony and examine documents because you are the finders of fact. What the judge did yesterday, before we took the break, was that he read jury instructions to you. Now, just so you know, you'll get a copy of those jury instructions, because I know it's kind of hard to listen for half an hour to all that legal stuff. But that's really basically the structure, the outline, and how the trial is supposed to work, giving you some guidance on what the law says. But there's nothing in those instructions that tells you what facts you are to find. And that's why you're here, is to focus on facts. You'll also notice, right before we started, the judge said no taking of notes during closing arguments. That's because what Mr. Gravely says and what I say is not evidence. The evidence part of this case has already happened. There's a theory that what the lawyers say in closing argument shouldn't even matter because we're not presenting facts to you. That's already happened. Now, I obviously take my obligation to represent Mr. Anderson fully, completely, and with the amount of attention that he deserves. So I am going to make some comments here. But I want to focus first on the fact that we are here to discuss what the evidence is. We just heard a 95-minute speech about what Mr. Gravely thinks the evidence shows. It was layer upon layer of conjecture. He used the words, maybe this happened, or I propose to you, or I suggest. And that's what argument is. It's really putting a spin on the facts. But the most important thing, and as you paid attention over the course of the past 3 weeks and a couple days, when you took notes and you paid attention, you are the finders of fact. Now, very soon, extremely soon, you're going to get to go back into that deliberation room and finally start this process of talking about the case. At the end of every day and during every break, the judge has told you, please don't talk about the case. And I know you've been dying to. As the developments have occurred and as the testimonies come in, it gives you an impression. Certain facts will stand out to you. Certain other things will catch your attention, and you wrote those down. Then that is your opportunity when you finally go into deliberations to compare notes and to debate what the facts of this case are. But we are urging you at the outset, let's focus on facts, not guesswork, not theories or anything else. Now, Mr. Gravely's right. He concluded with the fact that the burden of proof remains at this table at all times for each and every element of all the offenses charged. It never shifts to the defense. And some of his comments actually did talk about, why didn't the defendant do this? Why didn't the defendant do that? It's the state's obligation to present all of the evidence, both the burden of production and the burden of persuasion. In fact, it's been said, it was said at the beginning of this case, the defense doesn't need to call any witnesses. The defense doesn't need to say a word. And if the state does not carry its burden of proof, the only correct legal answer is not guilty. Right from the beginning, right from the outset of when this case was initially investigated and then the nearly 3 years that followed, this has been a process whereby the investigators and those prosecuting this case have had horse blinds on and are looking at one man only. And we've seen the process. That's why there was such careful examination, cross-examination, getting into the details of all of these.
I was wondering why he sounded so slow. I had to redo the window, so it lost my speed. Sorry, guys.
Evidence, including electronic evidence and everything else, all the surrounding circumstances, many, many witnesses in this case, because there was a fashioning of how this investigation was going to go. And I'll get into that a little bit later. Missed opportunities, things that are, frankly, shocking that they weren't looked into. Let's talk a little bit more about the overall background here. And what we do know from the evidence, this comes as no surprise, there's nothing disputed about this. Zachariah and Sadie were in a very long-term relationship that lasted many years. Together, they share 3 children. This was not a perfect relationship, not one made in heaven. And as you heard, there were ups, there were downs, there were a lot of things that are part of a normal relationship. And every relationship has its own dynamics. Over time, there had been periods of time when they were together, then they weren't, then they were doing other things, but they always remained part of each other's lives because, naturally, they share children in common. One of the things they talk about often are making plans so that Zach could help Sadie, Sadie could help Zach in these situations where they each had other things to do and they wanted to see their children and remain part of their lives. Now, over the years, we get to a point where, as Sadie testified, she was starting to develop a relationship with Rosalio. And this, again, as you heard, was they met on a Facebook dating site. They had started kind of talking. They had met. But this was at the very early stages of a relationship. It had only gone for a few weeks by the time all this happened. And as time progressed, we come to what I have to agree appears to be a tragedy here. Nobody knows where Rosalio Gutierrez is. Nobody knows what happened to Rosalio Gutierrez. And when we hear his mother talk about how she misses him and his friends that have not heard from him, I understand that pain. I understand that anguish. There's a big question mark up in the air about what has happened here. But all of this evidence, if you want to even call it that, all the facts that have come in, as we analyze them piece by piece, we're going to see that this is not a case where the facts themselves, the evidence itself, establishes in any way that Mr. Anderson is guilty. I want to start off by talking about stalking, because that's actually more complicated than the other 2 charges, because as we know, there's 2 counts of stalking. One, alleging that Mr. Anderson was stalking Rosalio Gutierrez, and another count that he was stalking Sadie Beecham. There's a count of intentional homicide and hiding a corpse. And we all know what intentional homicide means. The instructions are very clear. It means the allegation is that there was an intentional killing of another person with the intent to kill him. And then hiding the corpse is very obvious as well. There has to be a corpse, and then there has to be an effort to remove it, hide it, to avoid prosecution, detection, etc. Fairly straightforward. Stalking is one of these weird laws where there's so many different ways that it can be shown. And you have to consider, as we have said, and we've talked about here, a pattern of conduct, things that connected together form an effort to basically cause somebody to have serious emotional distress. Not just annoyance, not just why are you bothering me, or can't you just please go away. It has to be serious emotional distress. And
Serious. Do you think that Zach was causing serious emotional distress to Sadie or Rosalio? I do not, because Rosalio was like, I'm going to go over there and kick his ass. And then, or we can do this plan B thing. I don't know. Was he annoying? Maybe. I don't know. Possibly. But that doesn't make him a stalker necessarily. And that's what I think. I think the state failed to prove both the stalking charges and the homicide charges.
Or fear of injury or death. That's stalking. Okay? It's not just problems in a relationship that we might normally expect to see, especially when there's a dispute going on about who's going to have custody of the kids. And leading up to this, as Sadie talked about, there had been a discussion, an argument really, about what the status of the custody of the kids was going to be going forward. In fact, it had reached a head sometime shortly before this. And I know that Mr. Gravely would like you to believe that all of these efforts that Mr. Anderson was engaging in was in order to have this masterful, intricately laid out plan of murder. But another way, and a more reasonable way of looking at that, is this is a man who has 3 children with Sadie Beecham. He knows that they are not together at this point, and he knows that she is seeing other people, and they talked about it. And by the way, I think about 25 times Mr. Gravely say, if somebody's out there saying, I'm not jealous, I don't care, how can you believe that? Well, the testimony was, and you heard some of the recordings, that Mr. Anderson was honest about his feelings for Sadie, and he did admit that he had jealousy. He said that, yes, I admit it. And he was talking about that in the context of sending her flowers, telling her he loves her, and all of the other things that might happen when a long-term relationship is not on its highest level. Discussing where their future is in the context of their kids. So would it be surprising in that context when somebody goes on one of the easiest search sites that you could do, CCAP, the Wisconsin Circuit Court Access Program, when you figure out the mother of my children is going to be spending time with this person, my children eventually are going to end up having contact with this person, let's check him out. What's he all about? Does he have a criminal record? Is there anything going on? Is there anything that would cause concern? And it's it takes 3 minutes to do that. And also, just checking this person out because it's somebody who, as we heard, we're going to call her OA, you know her name, but OA is what we call her because she's minor, and because, of course, this is being broadcast everywhere. There have been problems going on with OA, with some problems, parenting-type problems, parenting-type issues that they were having. There was some discussion about that. And Mr. Anderson was concerned about who she was hanging out with, what she was doing, what kind of influence was going on in her life. And this is all part of his effort to basically make sure that his daughter wasn't in a dangerous or bad situation by checking it out, by investigating, by looking. Now, probably one of the most important statements that we got from the text messaging that occurred here, when the state is saying that Mr. Anderson, when Zach was supposedly stalking Rosalio Gutierrez, did you hear any evidence that Zach ever had any direct communication with Rosalio ever? No. Did you hear any evidence that Rosalio was actually afraid? Not a shred. Did you hear any evidence that Rosalio was being intimidated, threatened, in any way?
No.
Not at all. In fact, the statement that Rosalio uses in the context of what Sadie is reporting to him is, quote, I'm not worried. That in and of itself tells you that Zach is not guilty of stalking Rosalio Gutierrez. Mm-hmm. Likewise with Sadie, although she used the word fear on the stand, she did say that. Look at everything else that happened. This is someone who may very well have been annoyed by the fact that Zach was still trying to convey the fact that he still had feelings with her. He understood and said out loud, I know I have jealousy, I just want you to know I still love you. Again, all in the context of the children. But does it rise to the level of actual harassment, criminal harassment, is the question.
No.
There was a lot of bickering. There was an argumentative tone, antagonistic talk. They're swearing at each other. We heard that. There's name calling. None of which either of them are proud of, I'm sure, especially to have it played out here in court. But it was, for lack of a better term, a mutual process whereby they were both upset with each other about how the relationship had ended or is ending and issues about the kids.
Like a normal breakup.
You have to ask yourself, how afraid was Sadie and Rosalio? If Rosalio is giving Sadie advice, you got to build a case, and he's talking about an expected upcoming custody battle with the kids. And by the way, some of the things I tell you, you better delete them from your phone because they're working together. And a lot of this...
Yeah, what's up with those text messages that she was like, what text messages that she had to delete? She's like talking all in secret codes with like Rosalio and Rebecca, and I don't know.
It's almost in a joking tone when they're dealing with that. Not afraid, but hey, maybe
Plan
he needs to take
B.
some of his own medicine. Maybe give me his address. Let me know where he lives. These types of things. Not the kinds of statements that are made by people that are truly in fear, and that has to be shown, that there's legitimate and genuine fear. Now, we did talk about it in the instructions, and I know that Mr. Gravely touched on this point as well, but it's not just you do something, someone says, I'm afraid, or I fear injury or death. We have to look at, in that context, not only would it cause a reasonable person to be in that state of fear, but it has to have actually resulted in that fear. So it's beyond just the hypothetical. There has to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt that that fear was actually caused, and that it's not just based on, I'm afraid of this guy in general. It's got to be specific as it relates to harassment, fear of injury, death, etc.
So, Judge, I'm going to object to the argument. It does not, the stalking statute does not require that you feel fear. There's a set of subsections. Fear is one of them.
I'll correct that. Mr. Gravely's right. Fear is one of the things. It has a list of things that you can feel. Fear is one of them. Right. Now, I just want to comment that we heard it in opening statements, and we heard some development of this concept through the questioning of witnesses. But this whole concept that there was this major step in the relationship between Rosalio and Sadie, this major step where she was meeting his kids, and how that shows how advanced the relationship has gone, how close they had become. And that may have been Sadie's understanding, but we did hear evidence that essentially Rosalio was talking to 3 different women in one day about various different things and not being forthcoming with any of them, 3 separate things going on. So it makes you wonder how close was this actual relationship?
Exactly.
What was the design behind all the information that was being shared?
Sadie's acting like they were practically, living together or something, whereas she only saw him a few times before he went missing.
By both. Now, again, there's no evidence here that Zach Anderson threatened anyone with violence. Never said, I want to hurt that guy, I want to kill that guy, I want to do something bad to that guy.
No, but we have Rosalio saying something about wanting to do something to Zach, but we don't have Zach saying anything about wanting to do something to Rosalio or any kind of threat to Sadie either. We don't have that. So, I mean, he's not, to me, it's not like a typical stalker situation. I think maybe he did cross some lines, but I don't think that that makes him anything less than human. I don't know. It doesn't make him someone who is able to take another's life necessarily. So
Words that were never spoken, never conveyed, and non-existent here. What we did hear is Rosalio talking about breaking his legs. Mm-hmm. We saw the text between Becky and Sadie where they talk about how something will be taken care of in the context of how to deal with Zach. But they're talking about how to deal with this, how to address it head on, how to take action. Not the kind of thing that someone does as a result of being stalked.
Yeah.
But all of these were efforts that were aimed at him, things to do to him.
They weren't. Sadie wasn't going to the police and saying, this guy's stalking me and I want him to stop. She never reported him. She never was like, as far as I know, keeping track of things. If anything, Rosalio's the one that was like, keep a record of everything, track all the times he wants to spend time with his kids, which is stupid because don't you want your father of your kids to spend time with their kids? That would be dumb. So, I don't know. Whatever. I mean, just
Sadie
rambling.
felt that she just wanted Zach to stop saying I love you. She wanted Zach to stop sending her flowers. I'm sure that's happened before, and I'm sure those people haven't been charged.
Well, then maybe she shouldn't have been calling him Z-Bear and asking him to spend the night. Or to asking him why he didn't spend the night.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about OA, because Mr. Gravely made the argument that this is someone who was very clear. She may have been emotional. She may have been, I forget the word he used, but a little bit imprecise in some of the things that she said. But I think Mr. Gravely is acknowledging the fact that OA did
He said inconsistencies.
give inconsistent statements.
Yep.
And this is important, because at the beginning of the process, what OA talked about was the fact that she was not being honest with her mother or people that were asking her questions that had happened. She said at the outset, I wasn't being upfront. And what we can glean from that is that it's fair to say that OA didn't particularly like her mother dating Rosalio Gutierrez. We talked about the fact that she actually was the one that did the looking up on the computer of the location. And we talked about the fact that she was involved with looking at what's going on. And again, Mr. Gravely said that this is the opposite of someone who could be coached, yet his theory is that Zach coached her. It's an interesting part.
Yeah.
There was also a stipulation that was read into the record about OA changing her story, giving inconsistent statements. You had your own opportunity to observe her on the stand, and I think it's fair to characterize this that she went a bit rogue when that happened. Now, let's talk about the actual apartment where Rosalio was living. Mr. Gravely talks about how unlucky someone would have to be with all of this stuff, all these theories as to what had happened, and the things that he suggests to you, and the maybes, and the what-ifs. How unlucky it would be to be a target of that. It's also interesting to note that a killer would have to be the luckiest person on the planet to be able to do this crime and not leave any DNA behind at the scene. That is impossible. We also heard testimony from Detective Van Wee, which he was talking about the fact that there was the pooling of this blood on the carpet and that it had left this imprint. He used the words, the pooling was there in such a way that it had been there for, quote, a prolonged period of time. The theory that we just heard would involve somebody acting so quickly, so fast, with such precision, and down to the second detail to barely squeak it into how this theory may have worked, that it wouldn't be possible for someone to have been lying there for a prolonged period of time bleeding. So that in and of itself is a huge chink in that theory. It doesn't fit the timeline. We also heard testimony, and I know Mr. Gravely commented that it's possible that somebody did hear a scream on the night around the time of May 17th, and it was never clearly established what night that was. In fact, an original statement had it a completely different night. And there was nobody that law enforcement were able to uncover dealing with any actual hearing or seeing anything unusual during the time period that happened. Also, as it relates to the timeline, we can see from the evidence that was gathered, including descriptions of the walkthrough video that happened, that it's logical that Mr. Gutierrez, when he's there, he has time to turn on the television, he has time to turn on his diffuser, he has time to have at least one, maybe another beer, cut up some limes, relax. And that time period isn't really accounted for in this down to the second theory that the state has about how it could have happened. We heard a lot of
That's right. They didn't talk at all about like what Rosalio was doing once he got home. How, like, what time did he get home? Did they even ping his phone to find out like when he arrived home and what he was doing? You know, like how long he was gone, how long he was there before things went amiss. I don't think they did enough to distinguish to distinguish a specific time, to narrow it down just right. I don't know. Never mind.
testimony about evidence that was gathered from a variety of different places. And I want to point out the places they looked, and they found nothing that connects Zach to this offense. They looked in the sink traps. You remember that testimony about looking to see if there would be blood or any other kind of material in a variety of different places that would be collected in the sink trap. They looked in dumpsters all around the scene, dumpsters in other areas. They looked in these two fire pits. They looked everywhere inside and out of this apartment with Mr. Gutierrez. They did a full home search. They did a full search of the tree farm. There was the Zion, Illinois landfill. There was drone footage that was used. There were Crime Stopper tips. And none of this produced any evidence that is directly linked to Zach. Now, there are some things that Mr. Gravely gleaned from these, such as some buttons from some jeans, a bleach bottle that was partially burned, things like that. But in spite of looking at all these places where we would expect to find some DNA of somebody who was involved in some way in this, in all of that, it should have been found. Also, look at the relatively short time period we're talking about. If the murder did happen on May 17th, and if we're talking about 2 days later, this investigation really getting going, very limited period of time. Police had the ability to investigate all of Zachariah Anderson's whereabouts. You couldn't have gone too far or done too much during that period of time. But the fact that they're focused on him and him alone and come up with nothing should tell you that they were looking at the wrong person. Very clearly. The evidence, the testimony was that if we look at the overall police investigation here, there were 5 locations that were searched. There were 8 warrants granted for property searches, 15 different law enforcement agencies, 100 officers involved, a couple of thousand man-hours, over 400 items of evidence processed, and 35 warrants for information that were granted. As we heard discussion from Detective Correa, this was the largest investigation he's ever been involved in. And I believe he said the largest one he's ever heard of. All of that effort was to find evidence that Zachariah Anderson is responsible for this murder. All of that was also directed towards finding a body, finding body parts, finding Rosalio. With all of that effort focused on one person, and the fact that they didn't find any of that should tell you they've got the wrong guy. They got the wrong person.
At the very least, it says you're looking in the wrong places. At the very, very least. So it means that your theory of what happened is incorrect. So go back to the drawing board and figure it out, investigators. Don't just make a person fit into what you want the evidence to be.
Now, one thing Mr. Gravely said that was very interesting is that, again, when he's saying, I suggest to you, and maybe, and let's get in the mind of whoever this killer is. And it's someone who was meticulous, did a lot of planning, did a lot of research, did a lot of all these other things. And he suggests to you that there was a meticulously done process, including rearranging of things at the crime scene. Things moved around. And what he's not accounting for is where in the timeline that he suggests to you would there have been time to do that. Again, according to him, it really comes down to a matter of seconds where it's even remotely possible.
And And the time that he's supposedly bringing Rosalio's body out of his unit into the back of his van, Narita is sitting there waiting to meet with him and texting him and watching the front of the building. So their timeline, their theory, their narrative of what happened is so wrong.
Now I want to talk about the centerpiece of Mr. Gravely's case, and that is this dot, this minuscule dot that was located in the back area, passenger side of the van in question. And by the way, I just want to comment before I get there, and we'll come back to it later, some of the statements that involved who was driving, when they were driving, where they were driving, and things like that. But this was a work van. It's very clear. This is something that was not a vehicle that you'd take to go out to dinner at a fancy restaurant or pick up a date or do anything like that. This was what you'd throw junk in the back of when you're working on a demolition of a work site.
Exactly.
Putting stuff in there. Building
Tools, junk from your construction or from the site that you're working on, and you got to take stuff away that you rehabbed and throw it out in your dumpster at home, because that's what he would do with Susan Williamson Brown, the woman whose house he was working on at the time, where they went and did all the searches and didn't find a thing.
Materials, garbage, stuff to haul away. And as was explained, it was common for Zach, as part of his demo jobs that he would do in construction work, he'd take all that stuff and then eventually burn it. And it was an ongoing thing. Burning was something that happened all the time at his house. Now, let's remember that in spite of what Mr. Gravely says, there was not evidence presented that, scientifically speaking, this little teeny tiny dot was in fact blood. What we do know is that there are scientific tests that are available to do that, but they weren't conducted in this case. There was an explanation for that because they didn't want to waste this tiny minuscule sample and have it entirely consumed to determine if it's blood. Now let's think about science and what we want from scientific tests, things that use actual science, machines, measuring, use chemistry, all these other things that are involved in the process of producing a result that forensically, evidentiary-wise, we can say, yes, indeed, the science shows that that thing is blood. Okay? That would be a scientific test that was not conducted here. That would also result in a report that would say what they did, how they did it, the quality control measures that were used, the fact that machines would have been calibrated, and everything else to produce a scientifically reliable result that we can.
That's a lot of things that could go wrong in the process. A lot of things, a lot of factors in the whole process that need to be perfectly correct to be accurate. There's a lot of factors that you need to account for. Plus the person, the people doing the experiment. So even if your equipment and everything, your tools aren't perfectly calibrated and where you need everything to be, there's the human error that still could happen.
Can say, yes, that is blood. What Mr. Gravely presented was something that wasn't in a scientific report and was based, if you paid close attention, on the color being this brownish reddish color. That was it. That was the sole basis for them saying that, in their opinions, that this was blood. Now, maybe it is, but this is a factor where when we rely upon science to do those things, we would like it to be done in such a way where it's not guesswork. There was evidence. One of the analysts said that it could be skin cells. But if we're talking about scenarios here, and remember, outside of Rosalio's patio door, we talked about how there were so many cigarettes out there. And these are cigarettes that weren't tested for DNA, but both sides talked about how this is an area where a person or persons were smoking and leaving their butts right there. And yes, we talked about the fact that this didn't appear to be a smudge of whatever it was. It appeared to be an impact, something that was expelled, something that was traveling through the air. And that was based merely on the shape of it. Now, someone who smokes can end up having phlegm, stuff that they spit out when they're coughing, that may not be, clear, could be brown in color. There's other reasons why something could be a reddish-brownish color and not be blood.
We also know that some kind of lubricant for his saw is a dark red color that looks almost like BLOOD.
We also heard, with all those officers that I just talked about and all the processing of this crime scene, so many officers involved with collecting, preserving, transferring, transporting all of this data, all of this evidence. And it's got to be odd and questionable that there is one teeny tiny speck in this van that the state is saying means that there was a murder committed by Zach. Because when you expect to see much more throughout that van, all the other places they said this might be blood, and it wasn't. In fact, there was no test that showed anything in that van was blood. There was no test that was done. Now, it's also important to note that the DNA test here actually was based on, we heard testimony about this, familial DNA. What that means is that it wasn't from a known sample that was a direct match of that person, but somebody that shares common genetics, and that's how that process occurs. Now, the significance of this is that we must remember that Rosalio was talking to Sadie about wanting to break into Zach's van. Wanted to know his address. He wanted to give him a taste of his own.
Is it? I don't want to speculate that this person did this, but is it possible that she made up, she meaning Sadie, created this story, or her and OA maybe together created the story, I don't know, that Zach went into Rosalio's van first so that she could stir shit up and get Rosalio after Zach? Do you think maybe her plan was to have Rosalio hurt Zach or do something to Zach because of I don't know. That's just one opinion. That's a possibility. And I also think that it's a possibility, who are these people that he called in his text? Rosalio said he had people that he knew. So did he call them? Did they come and collect from him because maybe he still owed them something? I don't know. Like, if he's got these bad people in his life that would be willing to do something to Zach, why not? It's believable. I believe anything is possible. I watch a lot of true crime, and wow, real life is way crazier than fiction.
Medicine. If Zach had broken into his car, he wanted to break into his.
Objection. That was absolutely never testified.
That's
Never said
it.
anything about breaking into his van.
Very heard the evidence. I'm not myself allowed to comment on the evidence. If the statement is not supported in the evidence, you must disregard it. Thank you.
And much like Mr. Gravely took liberties with his spin on things, I'm talking about a logical inference from things that were said. And by the way, let me point out, the evidence in this case, a lot of evidence has been admitted, meaning that it's there for your review. You can wish to examine, read, look at anything that's part of this case. And I know we've just spent over 3 weeks doing this. And that is something that you absolutely have access to. The way we normally do it is we wait for you to ask to see something. But please know that you have the ability to do that. And that if you want to take a closer look or a second look at something that is in evidence, you should feel free to ask for that. Now I do want to talk about how this violent crime scene, blood everywhere, a violent attack. These are all exhibits that were offered and received into evidence. This is Defense Exhibit 340. These are the photographs of Zachariah Anderson's hands right after he was arrested. There was a talk about a little tiny scratch. Not really even visible in these pictures. A guy that does construction work. Here's a close-up, and you can see for yourself. These do not look like the hands of a man that just committed a violent attack on somebody else 2 days before. Some of them have used a knife and some of the blunt force instrument. Defense Exhibit D342. Again, close-ups of Zachariah Anderson's hands. Nothing of note. Defense Exhibit 343. Right here, we can see what appears to be an old healing scratch, much like might have happened when you were doing construction work, but nothing along the magnitude of what Mr. Gravely suggests would have happened here.
Almost looks like a splinter.
Number 3, Defense 344. Now a picture of Mr. Anderson's left hand. Again, pictures that don't match with what the state is theorizing here.
Exactly.
D345. Another picture of the other side of his hands. D346. The other side of his hands. D347, again, close-ups. D348. Now, interestingly, we didn't hear any evidence of any attempts to collect any DNA from underneath Mr. Anderson's fingernails or to process any of that information in any way.
I don't know if you heard that. He said, interestingly, we didn't get any reports of testing underneath Rosalio's, or I'm sorry, under Zachariah's fingernails to look for DNA, if there was any DNA under his nails. They didn't do any testing for that.
And I noticed that Mr. Gravely didn't make too much of a big deal about the whole Walmart scenario, because in his opening statement, he did talk about the fact that, in his view, the evidence would show that Zach parked someplace very far away, and it's unreasonable that someone would be so far away from the entrance when it's raining. Well, we showed the video. The video is actually shown, and he parks right next to another white car, and there's other vehicles in the area. So the theory that he's somehow trying to hide the contents that's in his van is not supported by the evidence. We also hear a lot made of the fact that he buys gloves and Clorox wipes right when COVID is going on, and those are things that everyone was buying then. And by the way, what is the logic behind cleaning up blood, messy blood, from yourself and everything else with wipes, with bleach wipes? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, that wouldn't work. They're not absorbent.
Now, the fact that Mr. Anderson was looking for a store that was open early, again, this is during COVID. This is when he had to go out to a job site, which he did go to, and needed supplies and things. So he did a search to see who was open. And he went to Walmart, where we know he shops a lot. He shops there often. His clothes are pretty much all Walmart clothes, which, by the way, when he went there, he didn't buy any new clothes or replace any old ones. He's wearing these flip-flops that his daughter said he wears all the time, everywhere, constantly. Now, I know Mr. Gravely said that there's this issue about these grandpa's boots. And there was a picture of boots, same type of boots that were found when they looked at the tree farm. So to suggest that there's a missing pair of boots isn't borne out by the evidence. Also, you'd have to ask.
Yeah. They're just trying to pin those boots on Zach, saying like he burned them because of evidence, to burn it for evidence. But isn't it theoretically possible that Zach owns his own pair of steel-toe boots, considering the line of work that he does?
If someone's going to use a bunch of garbage bags to dispose of a body, why on earth would you buy 13-gallon, with typically kitchen-sized bags
Exactly.
to accomplish that? That makes no sense.
You can buy the big old yard bags if you want to get rid of a body.
Now,
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying it's most likely what you should do.
we heard testimony from the work being done at that Cedar Grove home and the woman that owns that place. She talked about how there was lathe removal going on, and guess what? When they go to look at Mr. Anderson's place, there's a bunch of lathe and other building materials that completely matches that description of events, that he was doing a demo project. Significantly, and I know you've all heard this, she testified that she specifically observed that there was no carpet in the back of Zach's van on a date prior to May 17th. She specifically noticed that. So their theory that it was cut out at some later point. Now, I know that they say OA has a version of events about that, where now in retrospect, she has focused in on that point after having met with the DA's office numerous times, and as she said, she's talked to so many people about what happened. When she described on the stand how she was having difficulty remembering what exactly happened, her explanation was that she's talked to so many people it's hard to keep track. We also heard from a number of different people that Zachariah Anderson has significant back problems. He's been experiencing them for some time. And I'd ask, how is it possible for a man that has a history of back problems to wrap up a large man the size of Rosalio Gutierrez into a carpet soaked with blood, which adds who knows how many more pounds of weight onto that, and somehow lift that person out without dragging it, by the way? Because if it had been dragged, there would have been a trail of blood. This would have to be someone who was strong enough and big enough to hoist a body rolled in carpet up over his shoulder or carry it out without blood being dragged out of the scene. How does somebody with back problems accomplish that? We also know that Zach was there at the property in Cedar Grove on May 18th doing work. His phone pinged there. And incidentally, later that day, he goes to pick up his taxes. Is this what somebody does when they've just murdered somebody the night before? Just going about doing normal things, normal business, normal work. Now, one thing about this case that is utterly hard to explain as to why this occurred and why law enforcement and the prosecution chose to not view this as terribly significant was this whole concept of geofencing. And we heard what that is. It's a little bit complicated, but it has to do with utilizing cell phone data from carriers and being able to give locations of people who may have gone to a particular location. So geo as in geographic, fencing as in a designated area. Who came in and out of this area in a given period of time? And we heard testimony that Detective Correa admitted he kind of made a mistake when he was looking at gathering this evidence because it simply came up with too many hits, too much to sift through, too much to really have any meaning. But it did reveal a number of people who were in the vicinity of Rosalio Gutierrez's apartment during the time frame that the state believes he was murdered and the days after. None of which were tracked down, none of which were followed up on, none of which were investigated. And at a minimum, even if this wasn't somebody who would have committed a murder, it could have been, but even if it wasn't, people that would have witnessed, heard, seen something. And why didn't they follow up on that? Because they had their sights on Zachariah Anderson and him alone. By the way, if, as Mr. Gravely says, Zachariah had really traveled to Kenosha to stake out the property, they would have been able to do some geofencing to determine that. In fact, if Zachariah Anderson had been at Rosalio Gutierrez's apartment on May 17th, they could have done geofencing to determine that as well. And that was not done. Frankly, people that we know, it would be possible to track down people who were at the scene during the time in question, and it is utterly shocking that that was not followed up on. Now, Mr. Gravely didn't talk a lot about it in his closing, but he was very adamant to point out that there was all of this marijuana activity going on. And you've heard an instruction from the judge that talks about how that was admitted for a very limited purpose, and really the only reason that the state offered that was as it related to the cross-examination, or the direct examination, rather, of Zach's girlfriend and how much she knew about all that. But in the process of that coming out, we saw the photograph of the many, many bags that are claimed to be soil left over from some sort of marijuana growing operation. And if you look at the picture, they appear to be the same black bags that were purchased at Walmart. One thing Mr. Gravely is forgetting when talking about somebody going to the bank and taking out cash is that, according to his own evidence, if there's this drug activity going on, which again, that's only for the purpose of impeaching or the credibility of a particular witness, wouldn't it make sense that it was somehow involved in the drug growing that Mr. Gravely wants you all to know about? And if he took the money out to flee, why didn't he? Why is he still doing normal stuff and hanging around and picking up his taxes and working at a job site 2 days later, or 3 days later? We've heard no evidence that he was trying to purchase plane tickets or packing things up, getting ready to go, saying his goodbyes to people, no evidence of any planning. If that money means that he was on his way out of town, why didn't he go? It makes no sense. We also heard about the GPS tracking items, and I'll point out, these things that were looked up on Amazon and these actual GPS trackers, there wasn't any evidence produced that they were actually used at all. He's asking you to guess that they may have been because they weren't found. Now, Mr. Gravely brought out testimony from Marquand, Washington, about how GPS items can be used to track packages. Now, if this is one of the details that he says only someone who would have confessed to Marquand, Washington would know, I'd suggest to you that the expert on transporting drugs in this case is Marquand, Washington. He's an aficionado at being a big-time drug dealer, so that adds nothing to the credence that he has. Now, for the ease of explanation, I'd like to go through a summary of what the electronic evidence shows in this case. This is the timeline for May 17th. We know that approximately 7:42 p.m., Zach Anderson's phone pings in Mequon. That's the starting point. At 8:24 p.m., Neridia Macias texts Rosalio that she's leaving her house, and we know that the trip takes 37 minutes. At 8:33 p.m., Rosalio texts Sadie saying he's going to Mike's. At 8:49 is when the phone call between Rosalio and Kim Lavora starts, and we hear that that was a rather lengthy phone call. At 9 o'clock p.m., and remember, there was 2 different versions of this. At one point, Lene Douglas said she heard a scream on a different date, but when she changed it to say that it was this date from apartment 1B, the time frame was approximately 9 p.m. Also, 9 p.m. was the time when Neridia was supposed to meet with Rosalio. At 9:01 p.m. is the logical time when Neridia would have arrived, which is 37 minutes from 8:24 p.m. At 9:06 p.m., the phone call ends, and Verizon records establish that Rosalio's phone is at or near or in his apartment. And at 9:24 p.m., we see that Rosalio's cell phone is unlocked. At 9:43 p.m., Neridia Macias texts Rosalio she was there, and there's no response. At 10:10 p.m., Neridia calls Rosalio for the last time and gets no response. Then we see at 10:10 p.m., there's the landscape change from Rosalio's cell phone. At 10:18 p.m., Neridia Macias leaves. Between 10 and 11 p.m., Marissa Swanigan hears a loud thump. It's closer to 10 p.m. At 11:19 p.m., we know that Zach Anderson's phone pings in Mequon. So a couple things about this initial time frame. First of all, we heard the testimony from Neridia Macias about how when she went to the scene, she went to go meet up with Rosalio. She went there, she waited, she tried to call him, she tried to text him, and she wasn't getting a response, and she waited there for quite some time. And in her initial statement that she made to police, she talked about the fact that that was how she remembered things going on. Many, many, many months later, Mr. Gravely went out to the scene with her. And after that meeting, after they had a discussion about what happened, Ms. Macias then came to the conclusion that she must have been at the wrong address. And we showed you information about the fact that on an Apple phone, it can take you one place. But on an Android phone, it has the capacity because of Google Maps to take you to a different location. But remember, Maria at the time took a photo, a snap, of an Apple Maps.
If you can't hear him because he's not by a mic, Narita took a picture, a screenshot of the directions to Rosalio's house in the Apple, using Apple Maps, which would have taken her to the correct address.
Direction that took her right to Rosalio's house. So, incidentally, the fact that Mr. Gravely thinks that because somebody is not doing anything on their phone between 7:42 and 11:19 makes somebody guilty. God forbid you turn your phone off, you're recharging it, you put it on silent, or you take a nap. Don't do
Right.
these things because you'll look guilty. Let's look at what happened on May 18th. At 12 a.m., we know that Zach has a phone call with his girlfriend at Pings in Mequon. At 4:18 a.m., Zach does a web search, looks for Lowe's, Menards, different hours. 4:19, another search, Home Depot hours. 4:58, Walmart hours. Again, remember, this is when some stores weren't even open. Stores that were normally open 24 hours weren't open because COVID had changed things. 8:17 a.m., Zach arrives in the parking lot of Saukville Walmart. 8:30 a.m., Zach leaves the Walmart parking lot. Then we see it pinging in Belgium at 8:45, 11:28, 11:41, and then by 11:48, it's pinging in Port Washington and Grafton. Again, it's pinging at 12:23 p.m. in Port Washington and Grafton. He does a search of the Milwaukee weather at 12:39 p.m. And then, depending on which version of statements that Lene Douglas made, her first statement was that she heard an argument coming from apartment 1B on the night of the 18th, not the 17th. At 1:30 to 4:15, Zach's phone pings in Mequon. And at 4:16 p.m., there's a Crime Stopper report. Somebody saw a white female with dark hair on Rosalio's patio. At 4:52 p.m., again, Zach Anderson phone pings in Menominee Falls. That's when he was going to pick up his taxes.
I want to know who that woman was on Rosalio's patio with dark hair.
Talk about some other things that are admitted into evidence. This is Defense Exhibit 280. This is texts that were between Sadie and Junior, who we know to be Rosalio Gutierrez. Sadie says, "Papi, no snitch." Junior is saying to Sadie that he knows the address. 6813 Highland Road, Mequon. That's Zachariah Anderson's address.
Who's the one threatening who?
Further down, they're talking about from Rosalio to Sadie, "I don't want to make things worse for you. I just wanted to make sure if it's still the same price." Sadie says, "Thank you for that." Junior says, "For the record, only if you say it's okay." Further down, Sadie says to Junior, "What texts?" Junior says to Sadie, "Then delete those texts from your phone." Further down, Sadie says to Junior says to Sadie, "That's what I'm going to do. I've already reached out to old friends. I could be hands-free from this situation." Defense Exhibit 281. Junior talking to Sadie. "No, he can't be shitty to you either." Sadie says to Junior, "Like he can be shitty to me, but he has no reason to go after you." From Sadie to Junior, "If some chick did that to me, I'd go check that shit too, honestly." Kind of saying it's not any big deal. Sadie says to Junior, "That crosses your boundaries." Sadie says, "I'm out of it now." Junior says to Sadie, "There needs to be consequences for his actions."
What is Sadie telling
Junior says to Sadie, "I care about
him?
you and don't want to cause more problems, but I think I'm going to pay him a visit."
What is Sadie telling Junior about Zach? I mean, if she's a crazy chick, which it kind of seems like she is, she might be telling all sorts of misrepresentations of Zach and basically lying straight up. You know, if she wants to start drama and wants someone to do something about Zach that badly, she could potentially be manipulating another man to do something to him. I'm speculating that it is a possibility. I'm not saying that's what happened.
Rosalio says to Sadie, "I want him to know exactly who beat his ass up." Rosalio says to Sadie, he can have all my info. From Rosalio to Sadie, I'm not worried about it.
He's not worried about it. That doesn't sound like someone who feels severely harmed or threatened or, whatever the language was that he was saying in order for it to be stalking. It's not severe. It's not serious. A serious threat of your safety.
So Sadie says to Rosalio, I'm effing pissed he removed your personal information from your car.
If that happens.
Rosalio says to Sadie, really, I'm not worried or questioning. Rosalio says to Sadie, Ava found it the other day when she was riding in the backseat. Junior says to Sadie, LOL, I have no clue and don't really care, LOL.
He has no clue and doesn't care.
Junior, he has a letter from the last owner of the car, exclamation point. From Sadie to Rosalio, including this letter, so he definitely was here. Oh, and he says to her, LOL, that's funny. So that note was in the passenger side backseat pocket. Sadie says, and still has them. Or Junior says, and still has them. Then Sadie says, I wasn't sure what he was saying and why, but then Liv just told me he took something from your car. Then Sadie says, he took your vehicle registration and a note from DJ. When he left today, he said, you know that effer doesn't care about you. He really loves DJ. Then Junior says, did you record more? And here we go. On Defense Exhibit 279. Sadie tells Junior, Zachariah Anderson lives in Mecklenburg.
I'm going to see if I can find the texts for them so we can kind of follow along instead of just staring at Zach. I know it's like a whole tab of communications. Ooh, let me see if I can zoom in on this. This is the Cellbrite report. I don't think this is the page. That's not the texts. Okay. That was the next day. Shoot. Oh, here. Oh, this is the cryptic texts. Not all of them, though. There's where she's saying, he's hacking into my phone or something. Just told me he hacked into... OA just told me that he hacked into her school Chromebook. I can't prove it is the problem. How can you hack into a Chromebook? I don't know. So then Becky says, oh, these are the messages between Becky and, I thought it was, this is their last exchange. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Okay, let's read the ones from Becky. Continue this. It's short. So Becky says, well, this is where blank needs to stand up and tell the police these things and they can look into it. So she's saying, oh, wait, I think. Phone call has been placed. All I was told is it will be again and you will not know when, where, or how. Call me in 1 week. And then she corrects herself, but she said she didn't know what she was saying here with it will begin, which is a correction for it will be again. So what will begin, Becky? She didn't know. She couldn't remember. Something about her son checking to see if he could do something to help. I don't know. Didn't make any sense to me. These are the last texts. the last text to Junior. That's not it either. Okay. Sorry, guys. We're gonna find him. I know. Alright. It could just be that we saw it here in the timeline. But when were they talking this way? Sadie to Zach, Sadie to Rosalio. He took a video of us on the here. Okay, that's where it starts. This was what day? April 25th. She says, he took a video of us on the couch and me in just my tank top and us going into the bedroom. Then showed my daughter, she says. She told me everything. This is obviously coming from Sadie. We don't know if this is true or not. Here, let me shrink this down, sorry. Or actually... do this. It's still hanging off the side. Alright, that's better. Alright, so where are we? Okay, Rosalio, Sadie to Rosalio, he took a video of us, da 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 da. Rosalio says, are you effing serious? That's enough to call the cops. What's his effing address? What a pathetic piece of shit. I'm sick. Sadie says, I'm sick. I'm not sure what to do. Rosalio says, what is he trying to accomplish? And Zach is like, what the F are you talking about? Because Sadie was like, maybe you can plan more stalking me and taking pictures of me in the privacy of my home. And she's like accusing him of stalking. He's like, stalk you? I'm not stalking you. So maybe she just sent that to him so she had some kind of proof, some kind of trail that he was stalking her even though he wasn't. Your lack of boundaries and your harmful actions, she says to Zach. Let's see if we can.
It's not Defense Exhibit 272. This is where Rosalio says, well, I guess if he has your information, you should have... I guess if he has your info, you should have his. That is a text sent to Rosalio from
It's right here, 8:20 p.m. What's he doing? Is he showing
so
an
that gives us a
exhibit?
flavor, and that's where we're talking about the interactions and who is being harassed, who's being afraid, and all those other things. Now, again, when we're talking about these burn pits, remember there were 2 that were looked at. There was no evidence tied to the crime in either location. There were some clothing items. There were no bones, no body parts, nothing, just some stuff that was perhaps from some clothing items. We know that from the testimony that more than one person would throw stuff into the burn pit, especially the one at Zach's house. And by the way, if you're going to burn evidence of a murder, why would you do it in your own yard of your own property? That makes absolutely no sense. And it also explains why they only found some remnants of some random clothing. Now, interestingly, when Mr. Gravely's talking about how odd it is, all these funny coincidences and all this lack of luck that somebody would have, he didn't point out the fact that when these 2 individuals came to Zach's house, and they figured out where he was, and they said they were looking for Rosalio, that was the day when Zach called the police. If this happened after the murder, why would he do that? And that's something that a normal person would do when there's people coming on his property and asking questions of things. Let's talk about a little bit more about Marquand Washington. This is a guy that, by coming in, he's got absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain. I know that Mr. Gravely told you that if it turns out he's lying, then he could get into trouble for that, and there will be no deal. But let's use some logic here, and let's figure out what he's doing here. He's testifying for the prosecution. He's testifying about something that he supposedly overheard. He is in a big bunch of trouble, and if he goes down on the charges that he has without doing something desperate to get out of it, he's going to have to do at least 10 years and maybe more. So who decides in that context whether he's telling the truth or not? People from the government, both the state and the federal government, have to get together in order to make this motion that we heard about. It can only come from a prosecutor in order to reduce the possibility of that 10-year sentence. So if Mr. Gravely thinks that Zachariah Anderson is such a conniving, plotting, careful, meticulous, well thought out genius of a murderer, why on earth would he be blabbing his lips in a jail cell to Marquand Washington when it just so happens it's a Christmas present for Marquand Washington? Just so happens that is his get-out-of-jail-free card. Now, that's some incredible luck for Mr. Washington. Did you also hear the way that Mr. Washington described this when he said, die, 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 MFer? It sounds like something out of a movie or a TV show. It sounds silly, frankly, that someone would be in their sleep and they'd jump up and say, die, die, die.
Yep.
It sounds like a fantasy. He knows he's here hoping to reduce his sentence. Now, when we were selecting the jury and we talked about who's heard things about this case, most of you, or at least some of you, knew that there's been media coverage of this case. There's been details about the investigation. There's been details about what's been going on in all forms of media, print, news, etc. And there have been details in there that anyone looking at them could easily have gleaned enough information to be able to pretend that they had a private conversation with Mr. Anderson. We also heard evidence of the fact that there was this issue with the Discovery USB drives that were used at the jail, and that people would go and review the Discovery. And at one point, Mr. Anderson had reported it missing, and it later turned up under mysterious circumstances. It's easily the kind of thing that Mr. Washington could have looked at and could have incorporated into, frankly, the minor amount of detail that he put into it. You know, interestingly, if this is such a strong case for the state, why did they have to bring in a jailhouse snitch that is, frankly, incredible, unbelievable, and adds nothing to their case? Like, it shows the desperation on the part of the state to make this fit.
Yeah. Because the evidence doesn't.
Mr. Gravely talked about how these trackers, this whole theory that, hey, they didn't find it. They didn't find any trackers. So it must have been used to track. The absence of evidence, the lack of people finding anything. Well, there was no data or registration of any of those devices or any evidence of that uncovered in this very detailed investigation. He talks about, again, Mr. Anderson being off the grid and how unusual that is. He's making the absence of evidence seem like something significant. So if you're not doing anything on your phone, that's apparently evidence of guilt. He talked about the cell phone that, again, as he's revealing to you what he thinks the murderer would have been thinking, putting the cell phone into the freezer as part of this very elaborate scheme to cover one's tracks. Remember, there was evidence that there was a trace allele of DNA on that cell phone that we know does not match Zachariah Anderson.
Did I leave them offline? Shit.
Mr. Gravely talked about how for OA that it would be impossible for her to say the same thing as she did in 2020, basically explaining away why there were these inconsistencies and why there were these changes in what she said. And I agree that there is something impossible about that. If you go through your testimony over and over again, meet with the DA's office repeatedly, it probably would be impossible to remember what you said back then, and your story probably would change. Another thing, that I heard Mr. Gravely argue that Mr. McAtee's lawyer was standing here in the courtroom, and when he asked if there was a deal, the answer was no, and that's correct. But what was being talked about was whether there was a completed deal, whether there was something that had been signed and put into place. What Mr. McAtee was talking about was that there was an attempt to see if he would be willing to cooperate. And what he did is he came here and said he's not. Now, Mr. Gravely also portrayed this process whereby Zach would have had to go down to Kenosha, commit this murder, do a bunch of things, wrap a bunch of stuff up, get it out of there, and hightail it back to Mequon just in time to immediately talk to his girlfriend and say, sorry, I was having a nap. If it was done that quickly, and if there was an expediency involved, where he had to get back to make sure that his so-called alibi, as Mr. Gravely likes to call it, he certainly would have passed by places where there would have been video surveillance if he's trying to go the quickest way, not take back roads, whatever he's trying to do. There's been, in spite of a massive search of any evidence, that Zachariah Anderson went to Kenosha on May 17th, looking at all possible sources of evidence. There is none. And the only explanation for that is that he went off the grid. Now, another thing that's interesting about this case is that we heard Mr. Gravely talk about stuff that Zach said during the course of law enforcement people talking to him, and they were saying, what car do you normally drive? Which one is, how many cars do you have? And he's saying, oh, he was saying all these things that were misleading. Well, was it misleading to say that there are two cars that are driven and that one is an Audi and one is a work van? And we didn't hear a recording played of how that actually happened. We didn't hear a body camera. We didn't hear anything specific about how it was worded, how the question was asked, how it was answered, or what they were specifically talking about.
Yeah.
But to make it fit so that it appears that he's trying to be disingenuous, it's just sort of repeated that way. Folks, this is not a case where we should be relying upon possibilities or conjecture or guesswork. We have the highest burden of proof that exists in the world applicable to this case. That is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And this is exactly the kind of case where that burden is so very important. We heard about the massive amount of effort and resources that were put into investigating and prosecuting this case. All of those resources are at the disposal of the government. We did hear some issues about how, well, it got to be burdensome or a bit time-consuming or hard. They put limits on how many items we could process, so that's why we didn't do everything. I guess that's understandable, but in a case of this significance, you wonder why. But the burden of proof being so high is important because in our society, in our country, in these United States, before anybody's freedom is impacted by a criminal conviction, it must be when the government produces evidence that rises to that very high level. And in the process, must eliminate all reasonable hypothetical possibilities. All. This entire case is built on possibilities and a series of what-if questions. And it's an assembly of guesswork. The tragedy is that the real killer has not been caught, if in fact Rosalio is dead. Now, again, the way that this works is that if after hearing everything and after you go through your deliberations and you have discussed your view of the facts and what the state has or has not proven, if you come to the internal conclusion that it's possible that Zachariah Anderson may have committed these crimes, that means not guilty. Possible means not guilty. If in the process you come to the conclusion that it's very likely.
Objection. This is not proper argument about what the different scenarios are. You can talk about the instruction, but not conclusory words and what they would mean if they're not in the instructions.
Common sense, Judge.
Well, the difficulty is with the scope of the word possible. If you can reconcile the evidence upon any reasonable hypothesis, which is consistent with the defendant's innocence, then you must do so and find him not guilty. Go ahead.
And that pretty much summarizes where I was ending up with this, and thank you, Judge, and that's precisely what the law is. So if it's looking a certain way or if it feels a certain way, that's not how this works. And there's another instruction that deals with you are not to base your verdict on sympathy, emotions, or other things that stray you from an objective look at this evidence. And when you do that, there is only one logical conclusion as to all of this evidence that has been presented after this long process of presenting everything to you. Zachariah Anderson is not guilty.
Thank you, Mr. Robert. You have a maximum of 10 minutes, Mr. Gravely. Oh, Ms. Squizaric.
10?
I told you before we started how long was available, and I'm not singling you out. I told everybody.
Okay.
And I said the division doesn't work out if you talk more than 75 minutes, and Mr. Gravely talked for 95.
Talk for a little less than 90, but Judge, I will get it done.
Thank you.
Growing up in Wisconsin, my mom used to always tell me, if you hear hooves, think horses and not zebras. And that's what this case is. For parts of the defense's closing, it appeared we had watched and listened to 3 weeks of a different trial. Because what you were essentially told is that DNA is not DNA, and you should disregard it for a reason I'm still not sure of. Let's be very clear. We heard from 3 separate people from the crime lab. I got a little fatigued with the number of crime lab people who came to testify, and they all said the same thing. I'm a professional. This is what I do for a living. My specialty is either in DNA testing, or it's in crime scene collection, or it's in peer reviewing other people's DNA testing. And they all gave you the same opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. What was found in that van was blood. We zoomed in on it. To a layperson, it also looked like blood, but to 3 professionals, it's blood. Doesn't look like any other form of DNA. And that DNA belonged to Mr. Gutierrez Jr. They could not have been clearer. There was no hesitation. There was no but and X, Y, and Z. It was, this is DNA, this is blood, this is the victim's blood. So let's clear that up right now. There was absolutely no other way to hear that testimony from 3 witnesses with over 70 years of experience. The next thing I want to talk about is this whole theory potential of Mr. Gutierrez was going to go mess with the defendant's stuff in some way. Number one, there is no message regarding doing anything to a van, a truck, a car, anywhere. So when Mr. Robert cites that, doesn't exist. Look through all the messages, doesn't exist. But number two, and more importantly, the state proved to you through GPS that the victim was never, Mr. Gutierrez was never at the defendant's residence. He did Google or put into the Waze app the residence and look up where it was. But when he was doing that, his GPS has him at his home for a 12-hour period. He was never there, which means his DNA was never there, which means no one messed with any vehicle of the defendant's. So that explanation for this DNA also doesn't hold water. They talked briefly about Olivia Anderson and why she, the daughter, and why she can't be believed, or why she shouldn't be believed. But what you saw her do up there was, I think, the toughest thing she will probably ever be asked to do, which is to come into a court in front of a bunch of strangers, but more importantly, in front of both of her parents, and tell some of the worst things she's ever been asked to do. Say words like, I was my father's spy. He would have me record my mother, and he wanted it when she was angry or there was an argument going on. And she tells you those things not knowing
What a dumbass. I'm muted. Sorry. I don't even remember what I was saying. So, never mind.
about all of the digital evidence we've reviewed. And that's what's important here. Is she gives a statement May 19th, and she talks about these different things. Being his spy, looking through the windows, dad is recording, all of these pieces. And then the digital evidence backs her up every single time. Are there recordings on the defendant's devices? Yes. MSI laptop, 36 at least. 36 recordings, and they're a collection of, according to evidence, collection of the defendant and Sadie Beecham arguing, Olivia recording some arguments that are going on, and the defendant and Olivia talking regarding different things going on.
He was compiling evidence for a custody case. So it's not unheard of for him to have or want video of Sadie being verbally, verbally A-ing the kids. If she's verbally A-ing them or physically A-ing them, he needs to know that as a father, and to protect his children, he needs to have it documented so he can have full custody. And that is what I was saying earlier.
So she tells you something, she declares it, evidence backs her up. She talks about work boots. She talks about all of these pieces that are then confirmed in the actual evidence that was presented to you. And the same with Sadie Beecham. Sadie Beecham tells you on the 19th, in her first interview, he's tracking me. I found a phone on May 8th, and he was tracking it. She doesn't know that we're going to go into the MSI laptop and find snapshots tracking her from Oak Creek all the way to Mr. Gutierrez's apartment. She has no way of knowing that. What she knows is what happened to her, what she found, she reports it, she's confirmed. Same with May 13th. She tells you, convincingly, that he was tracking because he literally repeated to me what Mr. Gutierrez had just said. So on May 19th, when she says that, she has no way to know that what we're going to be able to do is verify with phone records, verify with cell tower data, verify with his GPS directional things we find on the G6 that he did indeed track her down from Mequon, arrived in Kenosha, and was sitting outside of Mr. Gutierrez's apartment when she makes that claim. So when we look at believability and credibility, we have to look at what is backed up by the evidence. And every single time, the daughter, Sadie Beecham, and all of the digital evidence on Mr. Gutierrez's phone is backed up by what the complaint is here. There was some talk, briefly, about how Miss Beecham wasn't harassed in some way by what the defendant was doing. I don't know how she could have been clearer in the different recordings you heard, in her testimony, in essentially all of her text messages. But the recording that spoke to this the most was the one from April 25th. So it's later on in the afternoon after she finds out the defendant has violated her home in the way he had, videotaping her through curtains. The recording that I played for you said, Sadie Beecham, I told you, and this is in regards to breaking up, I told you, I was honest about it. You don't want to hear it. You want to hear it a different way. That's what this case is. This whole, God, were they, won't they, will they get back together? It's very clear. They were never getting back together. Sadie Beecham was done, and the defendant wasn't. And he was losing control and jealous, which was, I think, also reflected by almost every piece of evidence presented via the text messages. She wasn't texting him the emotional ones about, oh, I love you, oh, I miss you, oh, all of these things. That was all him. as his jealousy, his loss of control, which manifested into an obsession with both Ms. Beecham, but in this case, more importantly, Mr. Gutierrez Jr., because in his mind, that's who was breaking up their family. The defense talked about how, well, no, they were open and honest with each other. The defendant and Sadie, no, open and honest. She was in a new relationship. They talked about it. No, they didn't. She didn't want to talk about it at all. She told you. The only thing she ever told the defendant about this relationship was essentially that she had a
It's because she was stringing Zach along and she was trying to date Rosalio at the same time.
friend. That was it. Other than that, the name, what they would do, when they'd be getting together, literally everything else was stolen from her by following her, by using the daughter as a spy. She didn't tell him any of that voluntarily. And you heard her say that. It's backed up by the messages. So this whole, gosh, we were both moving on and it was so great, not borne out by any of the proof. There's also talk of how it's normal that when someone in your life is seeing someone new to do these little things. And I think to a certain extent that could be. If you wanted to see your ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend, sure. I guess that could happen. You want to look him up on Facebook? Also could happen. I think you might even get away with, I just wanted to confirm that maybe she was really moving on, so I drove by the house and saw someone else's truck. Sounds like a bad country song to me, but I think you probably get away with it. What you don't get away with is taking it those steps further. Bringing your daughter with you in the middle of the night to her mother's house. Getting out of the vehicle when you see another vehicle there and approaching the house. Recording the activity. None of those things are anything other than stalking behavior. And we have it here many different times in many different ways. And the only definition for this is stalking. Sadie Beecham was more than harassed by what the defendant was doing because he wasn't just watching her, he was taunting her. He would watch something, he would then contact her about it. Every moment she had from April 1st on with Mr. Gutierrez was always clouded in, is he also watching this? Is he listening right now? No moment between the two of them was ever their own because the defendant was always there. And that was the point. He was interfering with her relationship even if he wasn't there. That is stalking.
I don't think he was, though. And the relationship was like, okay, you saw each other a couple times. It wasn't a full-on relationship. So, I don't know.
The question was then asked, was Mr. Gutierrez really being stalked because he had some anger towards him? But I submit to you, on the night of May 17th, when this defendant showed up at his house and blitz attacked him and struck him with a blunt object at least 6 times, that Mr. Gutierrez, without a doubt, felt harassed, felt tortured, felt fear for his life. And it's something he ultimately paid for with his entire life.
Oops.
So to say that he didn't have these experiences, these emotions, is disingenuous, but also not based in reality. He was murdered by this guy simply for having the misfortune of being the first guy that his ex-girlfriend moved on with. The timeline here becomes really important because it fits. We know it takes just about an hour to get from here to Mequon, and we know that the last time anything has been done with this phone when it's set on its side is 10:10. It gets him back to Mequon, it gets him back in touch with the world in every way that matters. If that was the only piece of evidence we had, I think we would be in trouble. But when you add that to the stalking behavior, the jealousy issues, the verified time that he had previously been to the victim's home, and everything else, it's one more checkbox that fits. It's one more thing that corroborates every witness that testified regarding who is the perpetrator in this case. There was talk about the defendant not having injuries. Well, it was a blitz attack. It's pretty clear that that attack started in the hallway. I don't know what anyone expects Mr. Gutierrez to have been able to do when he's hit immediately upon his door opening and at least twice out in the hallway. And then at least 4 more times in his residence. It's a blitz attack. This wasn't a fair fight. This wasn't, let's meet at the corner and fight this out. That's not what this was. This was, I will lie in wait, I will knock on your door, and as soon as you open it, I will carry out my plan, which is to murder you. Mr. Gutierrez didn't have a chance. So the fact that he didn't land a blow or didn't somehow scratch the defendant, especially if he's wearing gloves, matters not. He did not have a chance. You saw Walmart video. It was pretty obvious that it's pouring rain, as it was kind of hard to see at times with it coming into the camera lens. But the defendant did park incredibly far away from the door, in the pouring rain, in the way that's been implied. And I think that does matter, because what does he have to hide?
No, it doesn't. He was parked next to other people, so he wasn't hiding from anybody. His van doesn't have, like, tinted windows or anything, so he parked right next to a car. Just because he parked at the end of the lot doesn't mean that he was trying to avoid people. If you've ever been to, like, a really busy Walmart, you might realize that there's a lot of traffic up front and people are constantly looking for a spot closer. So in order to avoid that, it's just easier to park at the back. I used to do that when I was able to walk and I didn't have hip issues. I used to just park at the end of the Walmart and then walk in myself, but I can't do that anymore. But that is what I used to do.
In the van. What is left in that van that hasn't been cleaned up yet? There was talk of what he purchased and how it was COVID. He didn't care about COVID. He was, first of all, walking around Walmart without a mask, so clearly step one. But further than that, you saw his house. I mean, it wasn't exactly well kept, we'll say. This wasn't a place.
Because he was getting gloves and not face mask. Because he was getting gloves and Clorox wipes or whatever, bleach wipes that means it's necessarily for COVID? Not really.
Place that was routinely being Clorox wiped or cleaned or organized in some meaningful way. These were specific tools he needed at that time to take care of a specific problem that was still in that van. Just one more check mark of the fact that you know the defendant is responsible for this.
Again, it's Clorox wipes. Wipes, not bleach. Not a bottle of bleach that he bought. Clorox wipes, which don't absorb if you're trying to clean up after a crime scene.
There was a little bit of talk, and I'll briefly cover Susan Brown Williamson. When she mentioned carpet on the stand, I think you saw the surprise from a certain table in this courtroom, because that was such a focus of our case and in terms of talking to her. And that's something obviously she had never offered before, given the surprise. But here's what's more crucial. Not that it was a new piece of information, but that what she said was not that that piece in the back was gone. She said all of the carpeting was gone, which once again, you know, is categorically not true based on pictures. So it's yet another
She didn't say all of it was gone. What courtroom were you in?
witness who offers up something that they've never said before, but that one's not backed up by anything because you've seen the van. You know exactly that suspicious piece of carpet that's missing. So her now inventing a new reality about the carpet being gone makes no difference because how she represented it was all the carpet was gone, and we know that's not.
That's not what she said. She did not say that the whole carpet was gone. And that's how Jessica just wipes away that little bit of evidence there.
Case.
That's how the rug, it doesn't matter that she saw a rug that was missing. It was the whole rug. That's just a lie.
Miss Macias testifying. I don't think she could have been clearer. She went to the wrong building. She pointed it out to you, I think, probably 4 or 5 different times she was asked to get up. She showed you which building she went to. She talked about how she pulled in. She talked about where she parked. She came voluntarily to the police station. She gave them all of the messages she had. She did everything you would ask a citizen to do. And then she testified exactly what she did. And for me, the most telling thing, and I ask you to consider this, is when asked at the end of all of her testimony, now knowing that that's not his building, can you even pick out which one belonged to Mr. Gutierrez? She said no, because she never made it to his actual building. So is that someone who's lying, or is that where her GPS took her for the...
We know for a fact that she used Apple Maps to get there because that's what she sent over to Rosalio in her text messaging. And we know that that's what she used, and it was getting her to the right place.
The first time she'd ever come to Kenosha to meet with Mr. Gutierrez. I submit to you it was pretty obvious that she was telling the truth, and all she ever tried to do here was answer the questions posed to her. That's not suspicious. That's just someone being a good citizen. Lastly, we're going to talk about burn pits just briefly, and then I will wrap it up, Judge.
It's a little suspicious that she showed up 40 minutes late and never once said, hey, I'm running late, or hey, I'm not going to be there right on time. Sorry. Like the courteous thing to do on a first date.
Burn pits by themselves are not suspicious. I agree with that. People burn things. I grew up in the country, or you guys here call it the county, the country. We burn things, we burn wood, we burn different things at our house in terms of, fireworks, things like that. But it's in conjunction to what is going on in this case that makes it suspicious. 7 inches of rain fall over a 3-day period. And in this fire pit that's still smoldering to the point that the fire chief has to come and help put it out, or the deputy chief talked about the remedial measures they had to take, was everything that you would need to get rid of to try to cover up a crime in these circumstances. Bleach. Well, we know bleach was used in the car. You saw the stains. You have clothing, specifically jeans, at least 1 pair, potentially more than 1 pair, which, as Mr. Gravely indicated, makes sense here because you both murdered someone but then also had to clean up that scene. Socks, underwear that match yours, steel-toed boots, which that's not something that I've ever heard of being burned before, but apparently it can be done given what's in the fire pit. And that's why it's suspicious. Having a fire pit's not suspicious. What you're burning in the middle of a rainstorm is. You're getting rid of evidence you never expect to be found.
What does the rainstorm have to do with anything? If you got to get rid of stuff, do it. I mean, who cares if it's raining? What does the rainstorm have to do with anything? They keep bringing that up like it's, oh my God, he has a fire in the rain. He must be suspicious.
So in totality, what we have here is a defendant with the means, the motive, and the opportunity to commit this murder. He's the only person that was even talked about in this case that had any sort of motive against Mr. Gutierrez. And Marquand Washington was actually the one that gave it to you the cleanest way.
He's not the only one that had, I'm sorry, I'm just going to rip apart everything she says because it's all lies. But he was not the only one. I mean, Zach would not be the only one that could have a potential motive for hurting Rosalio. We don't know any other potential motives because the police did not investigate, and that's the point, because they should have looked into Michael Campbell. They should have looked into Narita and all the women that he was dating. You know, what about those? What about Sadie? They said there was a woman with dark hair on his patio door on the 18th, or on his patio.
Sadie Beecham was happy. Mr. Anderson was pissed because Sadie Beecham.
Don't use that language in the court.
I apologize. Because Sadie Beecham was happy. You saw Becky cry, her friend, Becky Jekyll cry about how happy she was for her friend.
That was yikes. The judge did not like her using pissed in her closing statement there. That was kind of funny.
To have moved on. And that was what made her emotional when she was talking about Sadie Beecham finally finding something that was positive and it was making her happy. And that's what the defendant couldn't stand. So what I'm asking you to do is consider all the evidence here, focus in on both the physical evidence, the DNA specifically, because there is no explanation for that should have any doubt in your mind that this defendant murdered Rosalio Gutierrez, and he needs to be held accountable for that. I ask that you return guilty on all verdicts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kazarek. Members of the jury, the time has now come when the great burden of reaching a just, fair, and conscientious decision in this case will be placed wholly with you jurors, selected for this most important duty.
All right, I'm going to stop that there. And let's take us to the verdict. We don't have to wait. Unlike in real life, when you're watching it in real time, you have to wait with everybody else, and it's stress-inducing to wait for
Critical
that verdict.
moments of the trial, and it may create the greatest feelings of one way or another, where you feel a need to react in some way. You may not do so. And as you can see, there's plenty of force here. If there's any kind of behavior that is in the least bit disruptive, without even needing to hear anything from me, the sheriff is here in person, and you will be removed from the court, and you would be subject to arrest if the incident were serious enough. I don't think we'll have anything like that, but just so you're aware. In addition, if you do not feel that you can remain in here, regardless of the outcome, then you need to leave now. Because I'm not going to permit a massive outflow of people at any point during the proceedings. So unless you're totally confident that you can react or not react in any way, I would suggest you leave right now. Otherwise, you're perfectly welcome to stay. And is there any reason why we can't take the verdict at this time?
No, Your Honor.
Nope.
Wait, that's what's reported to me, is that the verdict's so.
I can't even imagine the stress. It probably ages them about 10 years just going to trial, let alone the having to adjust to going to prison and just knowing that you're innocent and they got the wrong guy. Okay, they're calling in the jury. Oh, I like Nicole's hair curly. All right, where's this jury?
Elected a presiding juror? Yes. Would you state your name? No, well, we don't need to do that. Has the jury reached a verdict as to each count? We have. Would you hand all of the papers to the bailiff, please?
So this was on day 2 of deliberation, apparently, and it was 6 hours into day 2 that we got a verdict, so. I would want to throw up, like, the whole time. My stomach would be in knots.
Face the jury and hearken to its verdicts.
Yeah, he looks sick. Like he's going to be sick. It's so stressful. I've never been through this. I don't know, but I'm just assuming it's got to be.
State of Wisconsin versus Zachariah Joseph Anderson. As to the first count of the information, we, the jury, find the defendant, Zachariah Anderson, guilty of stalking Sadie Beecham as charged. As to the second count of the information, we, the jury, find the defendant, Zachariah Anderson, guilty of stalking Rosalio Gutierrez as charged. As to the third count of the information, we, the jury, find the defendant, Zachariah Anderson, guilty of intentional homicide of the first degree as charged. As to the jury find the defendant, Zachariah Anderson, guilty of hiding a corpse as charged.
Oh, I put it in the wrong stand. Yeah, you may be seated. Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts?
I feel like all hope just drained from his face.
You have heard the clerk reading verdicts finding the defendant guilty as to each count of the information. I'm going to pull you by seat number 1 through 6 across the top, 7 through 12 across the front. If you agree with each and every one of these verdicts, finding the defendant guilty as charged, please respond by saying yes. If there is any of the verdicts with which you do not agree, even one, please respond by saying no. Were these and are these now your verdicts, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Yes. 6? Yes. Oh, no, 5?
Yes.
Okay, 6? No, 7. 7. Yes. 8? Yes. 9? Yes. 10? Yes. 11? 12?
Yes.
All right, any further requests with respect to the jury?
Not from the state.
No, Judge.
All right. Folks, I want to thank you for your service in this case. I could not have asked for a more cooperative, pleasant jury to work with. And in no way am I commenting whatsoever on the outcome of the case. In terms of the length of the case and what the original expectations were, some of the interruptions and long breaks, and I could go on. You have been, I've never worked with a more patient and cooperative jury, and it's been a true pleasure for me to do that. And this is far more important than most people realize. I mean, our entire freedom
Why are Sadie and Rebecca bawling their eyes out? Like, why?
in this country is dependent upon people like you who take time off at great sacrifice to perform this service to their fellow citizens. And it's a guarantee of freedom against oppressive government that other countries don't have. And it's because of people like you that it's kept strong and handed down to our children and the generations which follow us. So there's no way I could adequately express the gratitude we have for you folks. And I want to advise you that you're never under any obligation to
Back of my head
discuss your service on the case with anyone. You're welcome to. You.
All right, he lets the jury go. He lets them go.
Don't, the less I have to do with the calendar, the more likely things are to
I
come
think
up
they're
correctly.
scheduling the sentencing hearing. There is a press conference here too, so let's just do real quick.
Get discharged, and then from the hundreds of officers to the thousands of man hours to Sadie to every person who showed up for this for Pocho, it's a culmination of thousands and thousands of hours, and we couldn't be more happy that the jury came to the verdict they did. They gave it careful consideration, and we're so thankful that they stayed with us over the last almost 4 full weeks when they only thought they'd have to serve for 2. But this really is a testament to, I think, good winning out over evil here, and the jury being able to look past the fact that we still to this day don't know where Pocho is, but we know that even in death he was able to leave behind enough to convict Zachariah Anderson, and for that we're so thankful. There's a lot of gratitude, and I will let obviously Celia take it from here, as she spearheaded this and she did so much to make sure that her son is not forgotten, and it's very clear based on all the people in the courtroom today that that will never happen.
I just hello. I just want to thank everyone that showed for support for my Pocho and the family over the years, either through postings and showing up here in court during trial, and especially during closings and waiting for a verdict. People have lives, they have jobs, they have children, and yet they were here waiting with us for Pocho. So I want to thank them. And when it goes to law enforcement, I will, Jessica has already said that what all they did, and I've always maintained that I was always very grateful to law enforcement agencies that had been investigating this case, everything short of finding my son. And so now we look for him. Any type of remain or any evidence that we can find of where my Pocho is, I ask the public to please be vigilant and be watchful if they see anything. So please report it. Thank you. While the jurors were deliberating, I was very anxious.
All right, she was anxious. All right, so let's go on to the sentencing. We're going to skip through some of the things here, but
The information charges not only that the defendant committed the crime.
this is now, what did I did write the date down, didn't I? Yes, this is May 16th. So the other jury, the jury trial ended end of March. So this is 2 months later ish.
Of stalking as to the first and second counts of the information, intentional homicide of the first degree in the third count of the information, and hiding a corpse in the fourth count of the information. The jury found him guilty as to each of those charges. It alleged also that he was a repeater because he had been convicted previously of a felony crime. And is that in dispute?
No, Judge.
Mr. Anderson, it is, well, why don't you identify the felony? So I'm,
It's possession of marijuana more than 10 pounds out of South Dakota, was convicted April 16th, 2020, which was about a month before this homicide.
all right. Is that a correct statement, Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
I have to actually obtain it from him directly. If he's not, then the district attorney will have to present the certified judgment of conviction.
Actually, Judge,
I don't.
by case law, we're permitted to use the precinct's actual basis.
You can. You're right. That is an acceptable secondary source. You don't have a judgment?
I do, but it's back in my office in the boxes of materials, and because I was.
In the meantime, I think he did concede the fact of the former conviction.
I don't specifically remember what dates, but yes, I believe that's accurate.
All right. The state alleges that you are an habitual offender because you had been convicted of the felony offense of possession of over 10 pounds of marijuana at Butte County, South Dakota on the 16th of April of 2020, with sentence to be imposed on the 27th of May of 2020, which I don't think has yet occurred. Is that an accurate statement?
No, he was sentenced in December of 2021 in the South Dakota matter.
I did read that in the pre-sentence. So is that accurate?
Yeah, Judge, it is.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anything further before the state makes its presentation?
No, thank you.
All right. Now, do you want to speak before or after any persons who would qualify?
I will speak after the victim's family speaks.
All right.
Judge, before the state presents its position and the family speaks, there were several corrections to the PSI that the defense wanted to note. I don't know if the court would like to do that now or
Yes,
later.
and I'm glad you brought it up. Thank you.
To that point, Judge, there had been a filing by the defense to adjourn this hearing due to the fact that we did not have time to be able to go over the PSI as required by law with Mr. Anderson. We were able to do that before this hearing started this afternoon. In reviewing the PSI, there were sections that I reviewed for the description of the offense, the factual section. I reviewed that on my own and found that there were several errors as far as what was actual evidence in this case. There were two. On page 3 of the PSI,
I'm gonna skip forward here.
I think that there was description.
Thought there was more
To dispute any
fun
of what,
argument, but there's
has
not.
been claimed by the defense?
Judge, I think a lot of that is just argument in and of itself, so I don't think we need to respond to it in this way. I think it's something we can clear up during our comments.
Well, I half agree with you. I ordinarily say if it's not going to have any effect on the outcome of the case, then I'm not going to have any finding. So we don't need to go through the ritualistic presentation of the state on each point. Certainly whether or not the sexual incident from age 15 was non-consensual would be a significant issue in a large number of cases. But in this particular case, I don't think that I would attach a great deal of significance to it, given the enormity of the crimes involved here. And so I'm not,
I don't know what they're talking
unless you
about.
have that information readily at hand as to whether that was clearly part of the.
Forward.
Okay? And you can go ahead.
3 years ago, you took Zachariah Anderson, took a life, Rosalio Gutierrez Jr., or as I and many others would prefer to him as Junior. And by doing so, you affected and ruined the lives of everyone who knew and loved him.
And I'm sorry to do this, but I'm going to interrupt you right
You're
off
not
the bat
supposed to do
because
that.
What you're talking to the defendant, and I understand that's how you prepared, but I probably ordinarily I would let it go, except there are going to be more speakers and they'll pick up on it. So okay, thank you.
It's been 3 years of questions, 3 years of confusion, and 3 years of pain. 3 years ago, exactly 1 week after my daughter's birthday, myself and her stepfather had to tell our 8-year-old daughter that her daddy wasn't coming back, that he wasn't just hurt or just missing, that he was dead. I can still see the look in her eyes and hear her cries. Even with that heartbreaking moment, how do you make an 8-year-old little girl comprehend the meaning of those words? There would be no more daily and frequent phone calls between the two of them. No more weekends together, no more laughter, no more celebrations. He wouldn't be there for her good, bad, or sad days to come. Just like that, he was gone and taken forever. He took away a father of two because of reasons we still can't seem to comprehend. An 8-year-old should not know the cruelty of this world, that there is evil, and that there are monsters out there that do unimaginable things. Zachariah took away an innocence that we can never restore in her. One day, my daughter will be at an age where she knows all the details of the awful things that Zachariah Anderson's done. She will have questions that will go unanswered. Why does she deserve to feel that pain over and over again for the rest of her life? Zachariah has shaped my little girl into a person that he had no right in doing so. He has taken so much from her. Judge, I have watched Zachariah sit there with no emotion and with no remorse. He has not only completely changed my daughter's life and traumatized the people who love Junior, but he has also changed and traumatized his own children's lives. And I hope he takes the time to think about that every moment of every day, how his selfishness and insecurities have impacted the lives of many. I feel this man is a coward, and he is a monster. I wish Zachariah a lifetime in prison to sit there and to think about the evil things he has done and the lives he has ruined. I truly hope it haunts him in the way it haunts us. My daughter didn't ask for this life, but he gave it to her. And I pray one day he will own up to what he has done, and that he can find it in him to give us and my little girl the answers that we deserve. My daughter, her brother, Junior's mother, father, family, and friends didn't deserve this. And Junior definitely did not deserve this.
Thank you, ma'am. And did your daughter wish to speak? Okay, thank you.
Judge, next will be Christy Raditz-Ortiz and her child, Julian.
So the other mother of his kids.
Right. Ms. Raditz-Ortiz?
Almost 3 years ago to the date, my life changed forever. I lost a friend as well as the person who I was raising my son with, his father. Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. took so much pride in that title. He enjoyed nothing more than watching his son grow. They shared so many special moments and memories. Sadly, all that was cut short at the hands of an evil person whose jealousy got the best of him. Because of that, Junior will only live on in our memories and our hearts. This by far was and continues to be one of the hardest things to go through as a mother. My heart aches for my son. Julian will forever feel a piece of him, died with his father that day. He contemplated quitting playing baseball because he didn't want to go on without his dad. That was their passion and something that they really enjoyed and bonded over. I'm happy to say that Julian decided not to give up, and he's come so far in the last 3 years in all aspects of his life, and we find comfort in knowing that his dad is watching over us. It's just so sad that he can't be there to see it for himself. As much as I'd like Zachariah to suffer the same way that Junior did, I feel a maximum life sentence without parole will suffice. Just knowing that he'll never be able to freely walk outside of the prison walls will bring some peace of mind.
Thank you. Did you wish to speak?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. I want to start with acknowledging that not only me, but every person I love and people that love me were affected by the murder of my dad. Not only me, but my entire family had to go to sleep not knowing where my dad was. Not knowing if he was okay, not knowing what to do, just sitting there feeling anxious, hopeless, and helpless. I didn't want to be happy or even smile knowing that my dad was gone. Just the thought of never getting a hug from my dad again, never saying another word to him, made me sick. Wondering, was he proud of me? Did I say I love you? Did he know that I meant it? I never in a million years thought that when he dropped me off on that evening and we said our goodbyes on Sunday, May 17th, it would be my last time. After thinking about it, I started to find ways to blame myself. What if I spent the night there that night? Would it have changed that monster's mind? I began to feel hatred towards this disgusting, jealous man. And I want nothing more than to have the name Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. to be stuck in his mind and for my dad to haunt him forever. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think of my dad, about all the good memories we shared on and off the baseball field, all the laughter and all the serious stuff, the life lessons he taught me, the good work ethic he had, and showed me that every day anything was possible. He would always tell me and my sister that all he was trying to do was make a better life for us and leave us something when he died. After he said that, my sister would say, "No, Dad, I don't want you to die." And he would respond with, "We all have to someday." We just never thought that someday would come so soon. There's a song that I really like, and it says, "It's a shame when people ain't around to see the smiles that they nurture and the laughter that they breathe." The fact that my dad won't ever be able to see us grow old and meet his grandchildren and to have that taken away by one jealous man is nothing short of a shame. With that said, I believe Zachariah Anderson should be sentenced to the maximum penalty that you can give him. It would make me feel better to know that such a monster can never be free. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Speaking next will be Sadie Beecham.
Life will never be the same for any of us, and I never would have imagined this would be my life. I've endured some tough losses, Deaths of both my parents and a beloved Grams, but no one could have prepared me for this kind of loss. Loss of dignity and self-esteem in a relationship that was manipulative and emotionally abusive, then coming to terms with having to grieve the loss of that relationship, losing the trust and respect of my one and only daughter, my baby girl, the one who made me a mom, due to the irresponsible, inconsiderate, and irreversible actions of her father. I've endured some tough losses, deaths of both my parents and a beloved Grams, but no one could have prepared me for this kind of loss. Loss of dignity and self-esteem in a relationship that was manipulative and emotionally abusive, then coming to terms with having to grieve the loss of that relationship, losing the trust and respect of my one and only daughter, my baby girl, the one who made me a mom, due to the irresponsible, inconsiderate, and irreversible actions of her father to exploit her mother and create a narrative of shame to an impressionable 12-year-old girl.
And I'm muted. Damn it. My dog keeps pacing, so that's why. She's pissed because Sadie lost respect for her because of Zach. That was the whole thing. That's why I rewound that. So she's pissed that her daughter no longer has respect for her because Zach showed the daughter who Sadie really is. Because Sadie was not telling the truth about seeing someone, and Zach was trying to make her see that they were both moving on.
Loss of feeling safe and the safety of our children, and the feelings of helplessness and fear with you around. Loss of a budding relationship and a friend who innocently and ultimately suffered the greatest loss, his life.
Oh no, what happened? Oh, that's the stream. But they lost the stream. Here we go.
Smile and big words, and yet I continue to allow them the freedom to have a relationship with our kids that they choose not to pursue. A loss is greater than I could ever imagine, but we will continue to survive these losses, and I will continue to choose love and kindness to move forward and to nurture and mother my children with. I will teach them all the good things about you, and I cannot fix the damage you've done, but I can minimize the long-term effects, and I intend to do that with love in my heart every day. You should have just waited for colder weather.
This is meant for Dad. So, no, I think it's okay.
Down. He's holding back tears.
13 letters was the beginning. Not realizing that the next 3 years of my life would be taken from me and consumed with learning how to be my own person. Watching myself go into a really dark place was hard. Getting out and regaining my confidence was a whole new level of difficult. I never thought 7 years ago this was the way me, my mom, and my dad's story ended. It breaks my heart to this day knowing things will never be the same. The joy, the sadness, and the anger were all things I once had, and then the numbing happened. And that scared me because it gave me the loss of respect, even for myself. I started thinking and waking up to the fact that now I need to make a change in my life and not let the same abusive patterns continue. Little did I know, I was already trapped. Trapped in a mindset I couldn't free myself from. To this day, I wonder, did he ever love me? Or was I just a pawn, a toy, or his little golden retriever? You took me for granted, and you will never get the same respect back. If you don't believe me, ask Mom. She doesn't have that respect either anymore. After this whole situation, I had to relearn how to not let what other people said get to me so much, and retrain my mind to not have a mindset like my parents. I think you'd like to know it's beautiful outside. It's for sure frisbee weather, and a bit windy. So turbulence would catch it, but we'd have fun. Forever and always I miss you, and I love you, but a quote from the 13 letters. Do not come back and expect me to welcome you back in with open arms. You need to work on yourself first. I've worked on myself for the past 3 years. It's your turn now, if you want your baby girl back.
Harsh.
Next will be Eugene Patterson.
This is Rosalio's stepdad.
Thank you, Your Honor, for allowing me to express the impact of the loss of my son by the hands of Zachariah Anderson. I looked up the word impact, an object colliding with another object, but also influence with added meaning to push to do or be different. My stepson, Rosalio Gutierrez Jr., Pocho, lived with my wife and I for a time, so we could help him get back on his feet as parents will do for their children from time to time. Pocho and I would talk, and one thing Pocho had a burning need to do was to return to Kenosha, Wisconsin, to care and help raise both his daughter and son. I told him that he is doing well in Colorado and should try and make a home for himself in Colorado, visit his children as much as possible, and have them visit him as much as possible. Pocho states, "You are the only father I have, and if I have learned anything from you, is that you have always been there for your children. My birth father was never there for me. You were, and I want to do the same thing for my children. I want my children to grow up with me in their lives. I want to coach my son as he pursues baseball. Impact. Pocho can no longer coach his son. I want to be there as my daughter pursues dance, and if she is in the future getting married, I want to be there to walk her down the aisle. Impact. Pocho will not be there to cheer his daughter on as she leads cheers on dances. Impact. Pocho will not be able to walk his daughter down the aisle as she continues her life with a person that will become one with her. Zachariah Anderson's life has changed, but he's alive. He will be able to write letters to his family and friends. If his parents and siblings choose to visit him, they can, and they are able to talk to one another. If his children choose to visit him, or his child chooses to visit him, she can. Even though some controls are in place, he and his family will be able to exchange gifts during the holidays if they choose to. Impact. My son Pocho has no choices. Impact. My wife and I can't even visit Pocho's grave, let alone visit him in person. During the holidays, with family and friends, there will be no exchanges of gifts, no exchanges of laughter, no exchanges of hugs, and no exchanges of love with Pocho. What does justice look like for Rosalio Gutierrez Jr., Pocho? His life was taken from him. The person who took Pocho's life should have their life taken with no possibility of parole. Thank you, Your Honor.
Now to be Rosalio's mother.
It was such a joyous moment and forever life-changing. For my life was no longer my own. I had a baby boy to take care of and nurture. Each decision and path I took was always geared towards providing him, yes, a humble life, but one full with love, compassion, and a safe home. Many sacrifices were made, including leaving his birth father when he was only 2 years old, to ensure that my son would not be raised he would not be raised with exposure to violence and turmoil in the home. Rather, to be surrounded with love, compassion, understanding, and learning how to treat others with respect. I taught my son these life values early on, which he carried throughout his adult life. Much later, when my son was about 10 or 11 years of age, I introduced him to Eugene, whom I would later marry, much later. Eugene was the father that my son had longed to have, a wonderful husband and stepdad. Both my son and I were blessed when he came into our lives. Over the years, my son felt his dad's love for us both, and as he grew older and wiser, he would share with me, "Mom, if I can be half the man Dad is, I'm going to be okay." Your Honor, my son learned throughout his life from myself and his dad what was expected of a growing man and father. My son was hardworking, at times holding multiple jobs to provide for his children's needs and expenses. His only goal in life was to be as supportive and present to his young children, showing an interest in their education, their activities, and the plan was to be present for them well into their adulthood, to leave his children some security and a legacy. Pocho had good co-parenting relationships with his children's mothers and their significant others as well. They all worked together, always focused on what was best for the children. Life's second changing moment was on Tuesday, May 19th, 2020, now marked as the worst day of my life and one I will never, ever forget. It was during COVID, and I was working remotely from my home in Colorado, and I received a phone call from my granddaughter's mother that she had just been contacted by law enforcement. She told me that law enforcement had responded to Pocho's apartment for a wellness check and that they were looking for him. Shocked to hear the news, I told her that I would call Pocho and check to see what was going on. I called my son immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail, which in itself was strange. I left a voicemail telling him that I was very worried and to please call me as soon as he heard this message. I then texted him and received no response. My son would always respond to my calls and or texts, especially if I sounded very concerned. He would always call me or text me to notify me that he'd call later. I then immediately proceeded to call his dad and told him that something was very wrong in Kenosha, sharing what I had just been communicated. I still had not received a lot of information, but I knew that we needed to get to Kenosha immediately. I recall receiving many calls and texts as we traveled to Kenosha. It was then that I suspected that something horrible, something so unthinkable had happened to my son. It was a dreadful drive to Kenosha, an anticipation and a sickening feeling of thinking of my boy and what had happened to him. First thing we did when we arrived in Kenosha was to go to our son's apartment. His apartment was taped off with crime scene tape, and a Kenosha police officer was securing the scene. I got out, identified myself, and requested permission from the officer. If I could just walk into the hallway. Being granted permission, I did so. My world was shattered. My heart started to race, and I felt this overwhelming feeling of despair and helplessness as I approached my son's front door. I saw bloodstains on his apartment front door and walls. The scene etched in my brain, never to forget. I knew then, right then, that my son was gone, dead. I can't explain it. I just knew. All these thoughts started racing through my head. Oh my God, why? Why? My son is dead. I just started to cry, and I was overwhelmed with guilt. I felt, and I feel to this moment, guilt that I had moved away to Colorado and not been there to protect my son. I thought of our last text exchange on Saturday when he texted me a photo of him and the children at the park. I responded with another text, not knowing that it would be my last. To this day, I regret not calling him back and speaking with him and visiting with him on FaceTime. I live with these regrets and so many more. Many days went by when I received a call from Detective Correa that my son's apartment was released. I dreaded it. But I am his mother, and it was my task and responsibility to clean his apartment and pack his belongings. I prayed and found the courage the next day to go to his apartment and begin that heart-wrenching task. I unlocked his front door, bloodstained door, and entered into my hell. I sat on his couch, taking it in, crying uncontrollable and alone. Alone with my thoughts of despair, imagining the pain my son endured as I witnessed the aftermath of his brutal attack. I gathered myself and started a walkthrough, videotaping and photographing my son's apartment. It would take me days to complete the task of cleaning and packing his personal belongings and his children's too, his furniture. I have it all, still, unable to throw away any piece of clothing he wore or item he owned. I would never forget having to scrub off and wipe clean the blood off the entry door, the walls, the ceilings, the blinds, the furniture. My son's blood was all over the front living space, with his blood spatter on his children's drawings and family photographs. While cleaning the kitchen refrigerator, I discovered my son's cell phone, driver's license, and credit cards in the refrigerator freezer. Yet another horror to witness, and the need to call and notify Detective Correa. My only son, taken so savagely, with so much rage and hatred. Mr. Anderson did not know my son. My son had children who loved him, who had been with their dad on the days leading to his final days. Mr. Anderson did not care. He did not even care for what would happen to his own children for his monstrous actions and the pain he would cause them and his own family. A few months after my son's murder, our family suffered another loss, my mother. During the ceremony, my grandson asked me if I would be doing anything for his dad. My heart was overwhelmed with sadness and grief for my son and my mother. I had no words for my grandson and barely able to respond that we would. After some planning, we did just that. One day before my son's 41st birthday on Friday, April the 9th, 2021, we got together at the church my son attended. Family, friends, members of the community joined to celebrate the life of my son, Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. We had no body to grieve over, nor to say our goodbyes. We only had memories, photographs, and the beloved framed Chicago Cubs baseball jersey he owned. Imagine celebrating the life of your only child and not having his body to grieve over. Imagine unable to put closure to his personal affairs because there is no body to obtain a death certificate. Or his children 3 years later with no death benefits for the same reason, no body, no death certificate. We waited a long time, 3 years to be exact, for justice for my son. But it would not have been possible without the countless hours of numerous law
All right, I'm
enforcement
skipping
agencies.
the rest of hers because it's really
Heinous
long.
actions by removing and disposing my son's corpse, not allowing.
An absolute girl dad for his daughter, would brag about her dance. Obviously a baseball coach for his son. And so through these people, I got to know a man that went by so many different names, from Junior to Pocho to Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. And that has been a very powerful experience because he meant so much to so many people. And I'm glad that the court got a little snapshot of that today from the people who knew him and loved him most. When we talk about sentencing, the first thing that we look at is the seriousness of the offense. Here we have 4 different offenses, but obviously the most serious one is the death of Mr. Gutierrez Jr. And the legislature has made it very clear that this is the most serious crime that the state of Wisconsin has and mandates life in prison. Really, the only question is, should Mr. Anderson ever get the opportunity to leave prison? And I think it's pretty clear when we look at the seriousness, the calculated nature, the protection of the public aspect, and Mr. Anderson's only character, that the answer in this case is a resounding no. Mr. Anderson does not deserve to ever live outside of a prison wall. And I say that because this murder was cold, it was calculated, it was planned, and it was carried out on someone who Mr. Anderson didn't even know. He had no reason to hate Mr. Gutierrez Jr., except for the fact that Ms. Beecham had elected to move on, and this was her first new relationship. That's what Mr. Gutierrez ended up paying his life for, was for a jealousy for a man that he had no relationship with, would never meet, and never interacted with. When we talk about the facts of this case, and the court heard for a number of different weeks, we have stalking behavior, we have following behavior, we have eavesdropping behavior, we have a lead-up of this defendant essentially prepping, planning, and carrying out this homicide. And the evidence could not have been more clear. Mr. Gutierrez was attacked in his doorway and was hit at least 6 times with a blunt object, at least. And once that was done and Mr. Gutierrez was deceased, his body then was taken from the scene. It wasn't left behind. It was taken from the scene and disposed of in a way that will never give his family closure, because the only person who actually has firsthand knowledge of where Mr. Gutierrez currently is Mr. Anderson, and obviously he's not talking. So the seriousness of this crime, the cold and calculated nature of carrying it out, and the absolute lack of remorse leads us only to the one conclusion, that life in prison without parole is the only appropriate outcome in this case. Another thing the court has to consider is the character of the defendant, and this pre-sentence is incredibly thorough regarding his prior interactions with law enforcement over the last several decades, almost 30 years. And it wasn't the number of convictions or the number of felony convictions that stuck out to me the most, it was his explanation for them. Because everything that this court saw in Mr. Anderson during this trial, in his statements to police, in how he presented this, even in some of the corrections that were made for the pre-sentence investigation, nothing is ever really his fault. What the facts are not really what the police say they were or what he pled to. Ultimately, he's essentially always the victim of circumstance, just like this case. And I say that because we talk about even the disorderly conduct, which I know is not an adjudication, but he even took onus with the fact that they charged him with use of a dangerous weapon, indicating there wasn't one. Well, as this court is aware, in order to make some sort of complaint, they obviously have to substantiate it with something. So there's one time where, nope, that's simply wrong. Then we talk about burglary convictions, where, oh no, I didn't actually burglarize anything. I simply pled to an offense or was adjudicated delinquent of an offense because my friend took something out of someone's garage and I knew about it. As this court is aware, that is not a way to be adjudicated of a burglary, simply knowing that something has occurred. Then there's another burglary offense where he takes onus with who was apparently with him at the time that it happened, saying that once again, law enforcement got it wrong, and his brother, I think it was specifically his brother, wasn't present. And then we have the sexual assault adjudication. And this one mattered because, once again, it's his own version of events. The victim clearly made the complaint that, well, yes, they were dating, and there was some consensual kissing. When he wanted more, she said no, and he forced himself on her. His version is obviously incredibly different. It includes that it was consensual, but also the reason that he was accused of this and ultimately adjudicated for it was because he was so irresistible that he was also trying to date her friend in some way, and so this was a jealousy thing. Not his jealousy, the 15-year-old female victim's jealousy, which led her to make this allegation and ultimately something that he was adjudicated on. And so we see time and time again in the 90s the same type of behavior that we see all the way in 2023. He talks about how he had been a law-abiding citizen for a number of different years, and I think that that's a hard sell for a number of reasons, but one being, in 2019, when he's pulled over with 26 pounds of marijuana in South Dakota, transporting it from the West Coast back to Wisconsin, I think it would be naive for anyone in this courtroom to believe that was the first time he ever did anything like that. People don't start with 26 pounds of marijuana transportation. That is something you build up to. That's something that is essentially bad luck that he got caught on this time. But then the telling thing is, after that, after being arrested for that, after being prosecuted for that, during the pendency of that, we then had his daughter come in and talk about 72 pot plants that he was growing in his own home.
Growing pot plants and ending the life of someone are two completely different things. Come on.
So when we're talking about character, it's someone who's already facing penalties for marijuana, 26 pounds of it, and then is, according to his daughter, cultivating more. And that was backed up by what was found at the house, the seeds, some money, some different things. But it shows a pattern of behavior and the character of the defendant behind that. But Judge, to be honest here, the real clincher in this case in terms of what should be done here is a protection of the public punishment aspect to this crime. Mr. Anderson brutally murdered Mr. Gutierrez Jr. He stalked his ex-girlfriend. He hid Mr. Gutierrez's body. And those are things that need to be punished. They need to be answered for. And I think the public needs to see the swift response of what is the deterrent effect when people get jealousy in their mind. Jealousy isn't a normal emotion that many people go through, but it's who we are as humans and our character that stops us from crossing a line. And what Mr. Anderson proved during this case is that he did not have the ability to stop his jealousy from costing Mr. Gutierrez Jr. his life. So what I'm asking the court to do is on count 3, sentence him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. But then I'm also asking for a symbolic sentence, as obviously that would take him to the end of his life. But I do believe that Miss Beecham deserves her own sentence, because what she was put through, the following, the gaslighting, the terror, everything that she had to suffer because of her stalking, I think deserves its own distinct sentence. So I'm asking that you make a prison sentence consecutive to that life sentence in honoring the fact that she also was a victim of this, and she also paid dearly in a number of different ways that she indicated to the court. I would also ask that you make...
I don't understand why her lips aren't syncing, right? Like they're a little off. Let's move on.
...are separate and distinct from the homicide of Mr. Gutierrez Jr. For sentencing purposes, I believe there is 1,092 days worth of credit, not counting today. I would also ask for a restitution hearing to be set, as I know that some documentation is still pending regarding some of those requests, and I believe that that would be appropriate so that parties can have all of the documentation before making a formal request. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. We have people on behalf of the defense that would like to speak as well. I'd like them to go first before. Right now, I want to confirm, but I know for sure that it will be Mr. Solomon Anderson. That's the brother of Mr. Anderson. I'm not sure if there's anyone else who'd like to speak. I obviously have been sitting here at council table, have not been able to confer with them, but if my paralegal may so do so shortly, just ask briefly and ask that the court give leave for us to be able to do that.
Permitted to speak by law or so.
Oh, there we go.
Closely impacted by the case that special attention should be paid to their thoughts. For example, a good connection would be a firefighter or a police officer whose life is lost, and some of that individual's comrades would be permitted. But as a general statement, I don't permit statements by other than the attorney and the defendant.
Judge, the defense would maintain the position that Mr. Anderson's family members have been affected as well by this case, will be affected by the sentencing. If the court would permit, just to allow Mr. Solomon Anderson to provide a brief statement, I think it's important for this court to hear from people who have known Mr. Anderson for the majority of his life about his character, because naturally that's not evidence that can come in during a trial, and I think it's important for the court to consider the character from the perspective of the defendant, and the defense believes that there's no one better to do that than Mr. Anderson's own family members. So I'd ask the court to allow the defendant to present one individual to speak on his behalf.
I don't see a letter from him, so he could have offered one of these letters, and had it come in more timely, had there been one, I would have
he doesn't let him talk.
Reviewed his thoughts, but I'm not seeing, there's one from someone who identifies.
There's one from Zenith Anderson, who is Mr. Anderson's sister. Judge, respectfully, the defense was not notified that we would not be able to have people speak.
I don't know why you would think that. I can't remember when I ever did.
And that's fine. That's fine.
I've been here
It's
40
just...
years, and so I'm going to say no.
Okay. Well, then I will speak at length of Mr. Anderson's character as I know it, as over the last 3 years, I've gotten to know a very different side of Mr. Anderson than which was presented during the trial in this case. It's very easy to point out the negative characteristics of someone and to address the negative characteristics of an individual when that's all that's been presented. As the court's well aware, there are numerous rules of evidence that prevent certain types of things from coming in at a trial. Things that show the good side of Mr. Anderson, the good memories that people have, and the positive things in his life.
You know, I don't want to unnecessarily elongate this, but I have been exceptions. When someone offers me something about, well, 2 years ago he was walking down the street and there was a building that was on fire, and at risk of his own life he went in and rescued a whole family. That's something I would certainly want to hear about, and that would be different. But here, the first letter he gave me, she's telling me her passions in life are music and animals. I have too many dogs. I have a wonderful cat, a gorgeous buckskin quarter horse. The things I love most in this world are my son, my family, friends, and chocolate cake. That isn't going to help me.
Sure, Judge,
If you've got something of the type I mentioned that is especially commendable in the defendant's character, I certainly would welcome that. But just a general character endorsement by his brother would not generally have significance in the decision I have to make.
And I understand that, Judge. I wasn't speaking about Mr. Solomon Anderson. I wasn't trying to offer what Mr. Solomon Anderson would say. I was simply just presenting the defense's position on sentencing.
She's making her argument.
Well, that I understand, but the way it began was
She's
following up on the discussion we had before, so I certainly don't mean to cut you off.
I think it's important, and just a premise, because I do feel cut off, and I do feel like the court does not want to hear about Mr. Anderson's character as we see it, and as I'm allowed to present it. But I would like to continue on talking about Mr. Anderson. This is the sentencing for Mr. Anderson, as the Supreme Court in this state has made it very clear that pursuant to Galleon.
Let me refresh. We're at 136. I don't know why it's like not syncing up right. It's driving me crazy. $136.
The information charges not only
Supreme Court in this state has made it very clear that pursuant to Galleon and McCleary, that a sentence, regardless of what the crime is, has to be.
This is the stream. This is how it is. So it maybe, you know, it was like a Zoom recording or something and it was delayed. I don't know. But there is a lag in it. So it's nothing I could do about it. I apologize. It is what it is.
Individualized. Has to be for the man who is sitting to the left of me. And if I can't speak to who that man is, I don't think this court can sentence him pursuant to that. So if I can continue, I would really appreciate that, Judge.
If any of my remarks suggested I did not want to hear what you have to say, I apologize for that. I don't think they did. I think I was finishing the discussion out to offering statements of others, and but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Judge. As I was saying, it's quite easy to focus on the negative aspect of someone when that's all that's been introduced. Mr. Anderson is a father, is a brother, is a son, and his entire life he has maintained those roles and has executed them. He has many good memories, and some of those memories were shared by others on the other side and in the letters that were provided to this court that I know the court had to review.
I really like her arguments here because people are not just black and white. There is so much gray in this world. And when you say this person is all bad and this person is all good, I mean, that's just not reality. So I really like that she's pointing that out.
Memories such as not cutting his hair until his daughter could cut his hair, teaching his daughter how to skateboard.
Whoops, paused it.
Being a supportive figure in not only his family's lives, but his friends as well. That was reflected in there. The state went at length to talk about how Mr. Anderson's prior record is indicative of his character and his denial and way to push off responsibility, and I don't think that's accurate. The latest offense that seemed to have gone unnoticed as far as accepting responsibility is the South Dakota case. There was never any thwart to responsibility. There was never any denial in that case. Mr. Anderson took a plea, and that was that. As far as the state's assertions as it relates to the 1994 disorderly conduct use of dangerous weapon, the defense would maintain that the court should not consider that. One, there's really not any information on what that was. The PSI writer even said, I can't gather any information on what happened here because no record exists. So I don't think it's appropriate for the state to assert, oh, he's had a dangerous weapon and denied it, when there's no proof of what actually occurred in the 1994 case. Not to mention, there was no finding of delinquency in that matter. In fact, when we look at Mr. Anderson's record, there's really nothing there comparable to why Mr. Anderson sits in front of you today. There's no history, no convictions of violence. That's not shown because that wasn't and isn't Mr. Anderson's character, despite the verdict in this case. The defense sits before you in an extremely uncomfortable position. We have a situation here, Judge, where the defendant maintains his innocence, yet we have a verdict. We have facts. The defendant at no point wants to discredit how individuals, family members of Mr. Gutierrez feels. I don't think there's any dispute that no one's heard from him, no one's seen him. And we would sit here in front of you and say that for those who, relating to Mr. Gutierrez, sit there and feel that they have some sort of guilt. Julian, his son, had noted that he felt guilty because he should have stayed, that none of them should feel that way. We have the verdict, but we also have laws that are in place. Specifically, Wisconsin Statute 973-014, which allows this court to determine a date in the future where Mr. Anderson could be eligible for extended supervision. Naturally, the state in this case is asking that the court deny that opportunity. Several individuals who spoke on behalf of Mr. Gutierrez and those who are directly a part of Mr. Gutierrez's life, ask for the same. But I think we also need to look at the fact that even though the legislature enacted the mandatory minimum, in this case, that being life, they also enacted this statute. And they did that because they recognize that there are things that can happen where an individual should be able to return back to society. And we have that because as a country, as collective people, our inherent nature is not to be barbaric, is not to put people away for the rest of their lives. We want people to be able to return and contribute in a positive way to society. That's why we have the correctional system.
Prison is supposed to rehabilitate the people and let them come back out to society when and if they become ready. That was the intention of prisons, not just to throw away people, lock away the key, and forget all about them.
System. So the defense would be asking that the court consider setting a release eligibility date in this case, and it can obviously be as far out as the court would want. The defense would be asking that it be set for after a 25-year period.
Jeez, 25 years in prison for something you didn't do.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And sorry, Judge, sorry to interrupt. I believe the state had said 1,092 days for sentence credit. That is the calculation that the defense has as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, Mr. Anderson, is there anything you wish to say before sentence is pronounced?
How much time do I got?
Well, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Oh, you mean how much? Oh, I misunderstood. I've had people give us
Yeah,
a
we're
different version.
not
of
that version.
How much time do you have to talk?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you a reasonable period. I mean, this is one of the major events of your life, so you're certainly welcome to speak. I'm not going to say it's unlimited, but you're welcome to tell me what you think. Speak from your heart.
I don't want to go into all the details of the case. We've got a lot of dispute about what was said, what was portrayed. I think the facts, with a little more scrutiny, tell a much different story than what the jury decided. And I don't think that things played out fairly. I think that there's some things that are not just from our side, questions outstanding for both sides. And I don't think the court accomplished what it set out to do in any means if both sides are left with so many questions. And I don't think, without going into the case, I don't think we really got to the heart of the matter. What I can tell you is, I didn't kill anybody. What I can tell you is, I didn't stalk anybody. And what I can tell you is, I didn't dispose of any corpse. It's really weird to be sentenced or convicted for it and soon to be sentenced for it. But I didn't, Judge. Kind of feels like there's no turning around on that now. I don't really know how to make a better statement of my opposition. But I disagree. I'm innocent. I don't know what you're going to decide. I don't know what you're all going to weigh. I don't even know how to represent my own character without having my family be able to testify on my behalf. But they do have some things that are relevant. I mean, even during the trial, there was a gentleman who tried to come up and talk to me. I think there was a comment about how now everything has happened during the trial when he made that attempt. Nobody really knew who he was, and I do know who he is. He's a man who I saved from assault in jail. He's actually related to one of the jailers. And my heart went out to him because I know he appeared inebriated, and I know he struggles. And I know he was coming up here to talk to me because we got along so good. But those tiny little moments throughout somebody's life, nobody accounts for those. But what they do a really good job of is making up all of these things that they want you to believe when they can label you as a monster. I still didn't. It's still weird. I want to be remorseful, and I am for the things that I did wrong. You're welcome to sentence me for everything that I did wrong, just like the judge in South Dakota. The only thing that I disputed in that instance was whether or not I was coming back to Wisconsin with that, which the prosecution has now repeatedly made false statements about on their own assumptions, hoping that everybody in this courtroom, everybody that's watching this, would buy, oh yeah, he was bringing something back to Wisconsin. Not true. Was I caught with marijuana in my car? Yeah. Yeah, I was.
Oh,
Should I
well.
have? No. Had been the rules there? Broke them. Broke the rules. And when they said, hey, this is a problem, I said, well, I did knowingly, and I'll be held accountable for it. That's it. And if I killed somebody, whatever that situation was, I can tell you in my own heart it wouldn't be intentional. If I didn't at all, the guy I never met, I don't really know what this is, but I didn't do it. I'm innocent, Judge. Not guilty. I'm innocent. So.
Thank you. When I
What do you guys think about that? I felt like that was so heartfelt. Yeah.
came out of law school and took my first job right here in Kenosha as an assistant district attorney. the statutory penalty for what the equivalent of this crime, murder of the first degree, was life imprisonment, as it is today. And before an individual was eligible for parole, 13 years plus, I think, 3 months, something like that, had to be served. And only at that time could the individual apply for a parole. And not a lot of people got paroled at that time. Over the next period of years, maybe within 10 years, the legislature had, as I recollect, and I think at the behest of the Department of Corrections, had reduced that minimum parole period to around 11 years, and they had it down to around 9 when the law started to change, and the legislature passed a law under the sponsorship of Senator Joseph Andrea from Kenosha that became known as the Life Means Life law, and it didn't provide exactly what it does now for absolute denial of eligibility for parole, but it did allow the judge to fix the minimum period to be served before a person convicted could be eligible for a parole. And then ultimately the legislature made further modifications to the point that the court now has the authority to deny eligibility for release altogether. It's interesting, the statutory penalty has never changed. Life imprisonment. But the eligibility for release has changed very dramatically. And of course that means not that you get parole, but you could apply for a release to extended supervision. The price for intentional homicide in this degree remains the same, life imprisonment. And every life is the same. These people have come here and expressed their very touching, moving sentiments about this person whom they loved. And that all is permitted for them to do because they're the victims and they've suffered a loss without any contribution on their part or that of Mr. Gutierrez. They've suffered a loss, which the jury has found, as was their power, to have been caused by you. So they're entitled not only to...
I feel like he takes forever to get his thoughts out. I mean, I know I do that, but I feel like he does. It takes a really long time.
Express in their mourning condition, but also to focus on what the text of the law actually says and ask that you be sentenced to life imprisonment. But the legislature, although it could do so, has never provided that life means life in those explicit terms, except in some cases where the judge cuts it off. And in a very high percentage of the cases, they do deny eligibility for extended supervision. But it's not every case, and every case has to be looked at separately, as your lawyer has pointed out. But like physicians at the hospital, when they have people brought in from a shooting incident, are not permitted to discriminate on the basis of age or sex or religion or even maybe a police officer who's shot, and the guy who shot him. The physicians are trained and are ethically bound to treat people in order so as to preserve.
All right, I'm skipping forward a couple seconds here.
Before the core of our beliefs about the value of human life. And it is expected, and it should be the same for judges. Every life is to be given the same degree of respect by the law. And when it is ended criminally, as has occurred in this case, every life that's lost should be valued the same. So when you read about these frightening statistics about the killing rate in some of our major cities, and unfortunately even here, the legislature still has not given us the command that every case is life means life. They've provided that a number of factors have to be considered. And those are what your lawyer referred to as the Galleon factors. One of them is not that you're a bad person. I'm not commenting at all on the type of person you are because it's not part of the equation. What you did was frightening, horrible. And you can wag your head all you want. The jury found beyond a reasonable doubt that you did it. And so the loss of these people
I'd be wagging my head too if I didn't do it.
is beyond measure. But it is important that they realize that I have this litany of factors that I must consider, and that what ultimately is the sentence that you receive is not the measure of the value of Mr. Gutierrez's life. That's if the law is what it is, then and the judge considers those factors and doesn't impose a life without parole sentence, the family, while I certainly don't expect them to agree with the outcome, should not take that as a comment by the law or by me or by the legislature or by the jury.
All right, so what's the sentence? Get to it.
As a policy of the reduction of sentences. They've got, well, the best, clearest example I can think of is people who are convicted of seventh offense, driving under the influence, and who are required, I think, the law is minimum 3 years. I think that's still current. And the judge was required by law to impose that sentence, minimum 3 years. The Department of Corrections was releasing people in big numbers after 7 months because they had come up with some treatment program that they thought was
What is he talking about? Get to it.
to reducing the prison population. Programs being pushed into the courts all the time to facilitate the reduction of our sentences. I just heard about another one today that we're going to be a pilot project for, where the drug courts, which have been originally, we were told were going to be very selective about who got in and who got much more modest outcomes. Now Kenosha is going to be part of a pilot project, and as I understand it, every single offense is going to be reviewed for the drug court. So it's, without commenting further, I'll just say there is a very large effort. There was a reference to the sentence that you deserve. And I understand why people would say that. And I can't say, I don't say it myself when I see about some of these crimes that are portrayed on television. But I don't like to get involved with what people deserve. That's a kind of a frightening concept to base a sentence system on. Actually, the reason we have the criminal justice system in the form we have it, where the sentence is imposed by someone who is neutral, is to reduce violence. Because if we didn't have this system, people would take it upon themselves to give people what they deserve. And I'm afraid in the era in which we live, with the way things are being handled in the criminal courts, we're going to see more and more incidents that will be branded as vigilantism, which are merely reflective of what people will turn to when they don't feel justice is done through the courts. So that's a factor that has to be considered, is the sentence has to address the enormity of the crime. I was very, very moved by the testimony, or the remarks today, by the lives that were touched by your vicious criminal act. And I wondered, to what extent did this man even think about these things? Was he so wrapped up in himself that it didn't even matter to him the effect it would have on the people who loved him?
Go lay down.
So if I got into the issue of deserve, that would certainly be at the forefront. I will say that you have been cooperative throughout these proceedings. You did not contaminate this courtroom by giving perjured testimony, which a very large share of our offenders do. The degree of planning of the crime and the concealment is very concerning and speak to a
Yeah, you guys act like he's this master criminalist that can just like make bodies disappear within 2 days. And all the DNA that would have been transferred into the back of his car, just magically
firm
gone.
determination of lawless behavior.
What are they saying? And what's going on? Judge?
On the first count of the information, it is the sentence of the court that your custody be committed to the Department of Corrections for a period of 2 years, followed by a 2-year period of extended supervision. On the second count, for an identical sentence to be served consecutively. On the fourth count of the information, hiding a corpse, for a period of 6 years of initial confinement, followed by 5 years of extended supervision, to be served consecutively to counts 1 and 2. And on the third count of the information, it is the sentence of the court that your custody be committed to the Department of Corrections for confinement in the Wisconsin State Prisons for the remainder of your life. The sentence is consecutive to and not concurrent with the sentences on the other 3 counts. The period of eligibility for extended supervision will not occur until 40 years following the date upon which you start the sentence on count 3.
40 years.
You have rights to appeal with respect to the disposition of this case, and your attorney will review them with you. If you understand your rights, tell Ms. Muller she'll have you sign a document acknowledging that. If you don't understand, tell her she'll bring you back in here for further instruction. There's a copy for you as well. Persons convicted of felony, as you have been, are ineligible to have firearms in their possession. That is a lifetime prohibition, and unless you have a permit from the Secretary of the Treasury, you may not have a firearm in your possession at any time for the duration of your life. It is a serious state and federal crime for you to do so. There is credit to be allowed for 1,092 days in custody to be applied to the sentence in the sequence 1, 2, 4, and 3. All sentences, as I think I indicated, are to be served consecutively to one another. Conditions of extended supervision, I think I'm actually going to withhold any action on that. On these.
This is how long Zach
supposition
has
that
actually
there
been
will be no
in.
extended supervision until he's 95 or thereabouts.
This is actually how long Zach has been incarcerated. 1,386 days, 16 hours, and 11 minutes, and 58 seconds. And that is where I'm going to leave you. So we have gone through the trial, we've gone through all the court documents, we've gone through all of the key witnesses, I would say, and then closing statements, and now verdict and sentencing. What do you guys think now that we've gone through it all? Do you think he got a fair trial? Do you think they got the wrong man? How difficult is it to appeal this? I mean, it's going to be difficult to appeal. It's always difficult to appeal once you're convicted. Your only chance is like if your due process rights got violated. Hopefully, we find that in this case. And then he can get some kind of new evidence, I don't know, if Rosalio's body is ever found and they can test for DNA evidence and find out how he actually went missing and if he really is no longer with us on this planet, because I still don't know for sure. Then, that would give us some answers too. So let's hope that, we can find Rosalio and get some answers. In addition to that, I want to remind everybody that you can head over to, head over to freezachariahanderson.org, write Zach a letter. You can go here, get his information to write him. For some reason it goes to letters and greeting cards can be sent here. And then periodicals, books, textbooks, magazines, and other things can be mailed directly to Wisconsin Department of Corrections. You can also add to his commissary funds. There's all sorts of ways that you can help here if you go to the website. So that's writing or donating to his commissary. You can also not contact, how to help. Go to how to help, sign the petition, send a letter, spread the word, do all these things. Make sure that people know who Zach is so that he knows that he's not forgotten while he's sitting in jail, prison now for life, without parole, without, or whatever he said. I don't know. I think he said when he's 90, he can get parole or something. So, maybe they can appeal this, hopefully, and get a better opportunity to present this to a jury, or maybe something gets thrown out altogether, like the charges and conviction. Another thing you can do is write to Wisconsin governor. You can write to the legislature there and make sure that they know. And you don't even have to be from Wisconsin. You can send a letter to the Attorney General of Wisconsin and the Office of the Judicial Commission and the Office of Lawyer Regulation. So all of these opportunities are there for you on the website. You can download. Let's say I'm concerned. I'm a concerned citizen. I can download that one and it'll come up. And why is it taking so long? Perfect. Look at that. All the information is there. They make it so easy for you. Please go do that now. Make sure that you are, whoops, where'd my free Zachariah Anderson page go? It took me out of the website. So make sure that you do that. Make sure you go to the website, check it out. You could also buy a shirt. You could buy merch, all sorts of good things there. Why is it not going? Okay. So definitely head there, do all the things for him that you can if this case outrages you. I'm also going to do a probably a follow-up, like a last minute or not a last minute, but a last episode, kind of to recap everything and put it together, and maybe do like a countdown of like, here's the main reasons why Zach is innocent, why he's not guilty, and then if there's any updates and stuff, I'll let you guys know updates regarding appeals and things like that, as when information comes in about that, then I can also update you. All right, so thank you so much for sticking with me for this free Zachariah Anderson movement. I know there's been a lot of information that we've gone through. We've gone through many documents, many streams together. So thank you again, and please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye. If you've been impacted by a true crime and would like your story told in your own words, or if you or someone you know has been wrongfully convicted or accused of a crime, please write to crimeincourtchannel@gmail.com and tell us your real true crime encounters. Thanks for watching.